Chapter 1094 Breakthrough Point. In a small alley in the Backlund Bridge area, Biyao once again met the MI9 staff responsible for contacting her. This is your reward from exchanging your merit points. A total of 2,500 pounds. Heh, I helped you get another 500 pounds. The golden-masked man threw a bulging envelope at Biyao. Biyao caught it accurately and didn't count. She instinctively pressed down and sincerely said, "Thank you." The golden-masked man waved his hand and said, "There's no need to thank me. This is also a good thing for me. If you continue to harp on past matters without letting go, I'm very worried that I'll go to military court one day." "Are you still going to stay in Backlund?" "Yes, I'm already used to living in a big city. When the war stops, I'll bring my family here," Biyao said, having already made up her mind. "Wait for the war to stop," the golden-masked man repeated Biyao's words with a slightly odd tone. He smiled and said, "May the Lord bless us to live until the end of the war." Here, the Lord referred to the Lord of Storms. "I believe in the goddess," Biyao replied seriously. "You understand what I mean." The golden-masked man waved his hand and said, "Are you still planning to take on missions from MI9? "I won't reject an opportunity to earn money." Biyao scratched her slightly coarse hair and said half-truths. "Yes." The golden-masked man nodded and said, "The main thing to take note of during the war is to deal with spies from all over the world. If there's a suitable mission for you, I'll look for you." "All right," Biyao replied without staying any longer. She cautiously and carefully retreated out of the dark alley. After watching her figure disappear, the golden-masked man looked at the shadow in the corner and said, "She was likely used by some particular faction. She was abandoned after she stopped investigating the matter." In the shadows in the corner, a deep voice sounded, "On the surface, it looks like that, but there's no need to pursue or worry about the truth. Even if she can figure out the truth and spread it, it will not affect His Majesty's matters." Heh, the Church of Evernight has already tacitly agreed. "That's for the best," the golden-masked man silently exhaled. After returning to her residence at the edge of East Borough, Biyao said to Furs, who was sitting by the bed and reading the newspapers, "I received 2,500 pounds. Furs put down the newspaper, her eyes moving slightly as she focused on making calculations. "That's enough." Biyao had savings of more than 600 pounds, and with the 2,500 pounds, other than her necessary expenses, she had 3,100 pounds to spend freely. And her purchase of the Judge Potion formula was 2,000 pounds, and the Beyonder characteristic was 3,500 pounds. In other words, she was still short of 2,400 pounds, something that Furs could lend her. After borrowing this sum of money, Furs's savings would be reduced to 780 pounds. However, this didn't affect her at all. She had the subsequent potion formula and main ingredients, so she didn't have many expenditures for a long period of time into the future. Occasionally, she could even earn a little from renting out Lamino's travels. "Yes." Biyao nodded. "I'll complete the transaction as soon as possible and strive to advance to sequence 6 as soon as possible." Seeing that her friend's matter was settled, Furs turned to worry about herself. "I don't know when my scribe potion will be completely digested. Now that the war has broken out, it will be much safer with the ability to travel. The crux of a scribe is definitely recording. When I become a judge, you'll have new Beyonder powers to repeatedly record. This should be able to speed up the digestion of the potion." Biyao pulled a chair over and sat down. Furs sighed. "I suspect that, other than the recording of Beyonder powers, I need to record down the sites and customs of different places. Only then can it be matched with the subsequent traveler sequence. But with war having broken out now, it's fine if I go further inland, but it will be difficult and dangerous if I go somewhere else. Sigh, the price of bread is rising. The price of 1 pound of bread has risen by a farthing. It's even more expensive than before the Grain Act was abolished." "Indeed." Biyao thought seriously and agreed with Furs's conclusion. The two fell silent. After about 10 seconds, Biyao suddenly had an idea. "Actually, there's a very simple solution. What? Furs sat up slightly and asked. You can spend money to hire that person to take you traveling. Xiao was very careful not to mention specific code names and actual names. You can be thrown somewhere unfamiliar each time for 3 to 4 days, or even a week. Then, you wouldn't take long to record all kinds of customs and traditions. Besides, you can rent some mystical items from them, to record beyond your powers. This can both improve your strength and help your digestion. That's right. Furz's eyes lit up when she heard that. Only then did she realize that her usage of the tarot gathering was very superficial. After the pleasant surprise, Furz gradually frowned. This method meant that she had to frequently deal with the world Gehrman sparrow, and the thought of the crazy adventurer left her trembling. Indeed, there's nothing that doesn't require a price. To digest the potion, I can only take the risk. Finally, Furz made up her mind to make the request next week at the tarot gathering. In an apartment several streets away from where Xiao and Furz stayed. After returning from the Srenzo restaurant, Klein was sitting in front of a table. He quickly flipped through today's newspaper and summarized the important information he had received. The Faisak Empire's Sonia Sea Fleet has retreated from Pritz Harbor, their whereabouts are unknown. The Ministry of Defense, Admiral Amirius, has indicated that he will strengthen the coastal defenses and allow the 3 ironclad warship fleet to not return too hastily, and will take detours to avoid being ambushed. Faisak's 2-headed giant army invaded the Winter County's Amantha mountain range and suffered intense resistance. They failed to pass through the few strongholds. Faisak's subjugation fleet attacked Constant and other large-scale industrial cities along the Mid-Seashire's eastern coast. There was a large-scale sea battle with the kingdom's Mid-Seashire fleet. Both sides suffered losses. East Balam's Faisak and the lone colonial armies are fighting in multiple locations. The rest of the countries have yet to make their stance clear. In the corresponding capitals, the ambassadors are running around to contact each other to have emergency diplomatic meetings. The electrical transmission waves contain all kinds of important news and are intertwining with each other in the different cities of the northern and southern continents. We are still in the early stages of the war. Klein didn't believe that the diplomats were able to avert the war. He put down the newspaper and thought about how he could gather information regarding George Ill's Black Emperor ritual. According to normal logic, before Blood Emperor Alista went crazy, he did things in a reasonable manner. That is to say, he couldn't build all 9 mausoleums in the same hidden area. This would have been easy for others to wipe them out all at once, causing his resurrection to fail. Therefore, in the surrounding areas of Backlund, in other parts of the kingdom, there should be 8 other mausoleums that are similar. They haven't been exposed yet, so they might not be as heavily guarded as Ruins Number 1. This might give us an opportunity. Perhaps the Red Angel evil spirit might know something, but I can't contact him now. Ignoring the question of whether chanting his honorific name will be dangerous, just this act alone will expose my intention to prevent George III from becoming the Black Emperor. To a terrifying conspirer, there are too many points that can be exploited. Queen Mystic might have some channels and clues, but I can't just rely on her. At the moment, the Church doesn't know how many of the Blood Emperor's secret ruins there are, or where they are. Attacking a key figure beside the king, such as a demigod from the royal family who is deeply involved in this matter? They must be on their guard. Furthermore, the angel of the Augustus family and that ancient secret organization would most likely be watching everything, one in the open, and one in the dark. In addition, as long as the royal family's demigod ends up in an accident, George III would definitely guess that someone is trying to stop him from becoming a god. Yes, Demoness of White Katerina will be easier to deal with than the demigods of the royal family. It would attract much less attention. Theoretically speaking, George III, who has been tacitly accepted by the few major churches, no longer needs to work with the Demoness sect. Not that there is a need for that. If not for some particular reason, the two sides would have been completely tied together in this matter. The first thing he needs to do now is to cut off ties with the Demoness sect. Of course, he would most likely not betray the Demoness sect directly. On the one hand, the demonesses are also adept at ploys, so they wouldn't be unwary. On the other hand, if they anger the upper echelons of the Demonist sect, George Ill's Black Emperor ritual might not be that safe. This is a secret organization with a true deity, Grade 0 sealed artifacts, and angels. As long as George III is still rational, the correct method is to follow the agreement and give everything that needs to be given. Then, he will send the members of the Demonist sect away. During this process, he will use the help of angels from the mind domain or even a king of angels to erase the key memories of the demon sect participating in the matter. If that's the case, even if Demoness of White Katarina goes missing for some time, it wouldn't alert George III. He might not even know. And from the perspective of the Demonist sect, the matter has come to an end. The various churches have also tacitly agreed to it. They no longer need to hide like they did in the past and can move about freely. This gives me and Queen Mystic a chance. Yes, Vice Admiral Ailment will likely appear again. From her appearance and the attitude of Demoness of White from back then, it can be determined that she and Katarina are related by blood. With this in mind, Klein heaved a sigh of relief. He cast his gaze out the window and silently muttered, I hope Anderson and Danitz can find that pirate admiral as soon as possible. I hope that the City of Miracles in Grozel's travels can effectively destroy the influence of the mind domain. And all he could do now was to wait patiently. Berserk Sea, Theros Island. Danitz said to Anderson in delight, I just learned that the southwest region of this place isn't a normal sea route. There's an island with no resources but is hidden enough. Chapter 1095 Acting as himself, you suspect that Vice Admiral Ailment's fleet is hidden there? Anderson asked in thought when he heard Danitz's words. Danitz replied in excitement, it's very likely. Didn't the Black Death vanish after steering towards the west and after leaving Theros Island? Anderson curled his lips and chuckled. If Vice Admiral Ailment's whereabouts were so easily discovered by you, why would she need to hide? How can islands that you can find out about be considered hidden enough? Hey! What do you mean by that? Danitz felt like he had been mocked. Anderson shrugged. I don't mean anything. I'm just using my brain to analyze it. That island should exist, but it either belongs to the type that many people here know about, or it's intel that someone deliberately released. If it's the former, Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy's fleet definitely wouldn't be hiding there. If it's the latter, that would be interesting. Who would release this intel? Danitz was still a little angry at first, but later, he began analyzing Anderson's line of thought. A trap set up by some pirates or adventurers? However, an island without any resources isn't enough to lure others into exploring it. Vice Admiral Ailment herself? To figure out who's investigating her whereabouts? Anderson smiled. That's right. After my teachings, you've improved quite a bit. Otherwise, I suspect that even if you drink the Conspirer potion, you wouldn't be able to enhance your brain. You'll only mutate and turn your enemy stupid, bringing him down to a level at which you're familiar with, and then defeat him with experience. I didn't say that. It was Emperor Roselle. After this period of searching, Anderson had already helped Danitz obtain one of the main ingredients of the Conspirer potion and nearly all the supplementary ingredients. He was just one step away from success. I suspect that you have such an ability, Danitz muttered softly in response. Anderson ignored him and continued, if Vice Admiral Ailment got someone to release the news herself, the secret island must be a trap. Perhaps there's nothing other than a mirror that monitors the ships and humans that approach the island. Or perhaps it might be an important gathering base of the Demonist sect that Gehrman Sparrow mentioned. Then what should we do next? Danitz subconsciously asked. Anderson chuckled when he heard that. You can't even figure out such a simple matter? Naturally, we'll seek out the person you heard this intel from. After finding the source of his information, we can trace it back, and we'll eventually find something. That's right. Danitz wanted to nod in agreement, but the words that reached his mouth turned into a heh. Nearing dawn, on the second floor of a casino. Bartz, with his brown hair, yawned and walked into his room. Before he could use the moonlight outside the window to light the candle, he suddenly saw a bright white flame light up in front of him, momentarily blinding him. Bart's heart tightened as he pounced to the side and rolled. After rolling twice, he suddenly stopped his actions, as though he had been petrified. This was because there was a bone-chilling coldness and a slight pain around his neck. This made him have no doubt that if he proceeded any further, blood would definitely spray onto the roof. "What do you want?" At that moment, Bart's vision had recovered. He saw a blond man with one hand in his pocket and a black short sword in the other. Beside him was a man wearing a black cloak that covered half of his face with a hood. Danitz didn't answer Bart's question as he looked at Anderson in surprise. "Why didn't you disguise yourself? If you disguise yourself, how can you let others know who to hate?" Anderson replied with a nonchalant look. Danitz exhaled. "Thankfully, I haven't been infected by this crappy habit of yours." "It's fine," Anderson said with a smile. "Any random person on the island can know who I've been hanging out with." "Dog's hit." Danitz cursed. Bart's, who had Anderson's sword at his neck, didn't dare to move. All he could do was listen quietly. He felt as though he had returned to Trier and was watching a comical scene. What are the two of them here for? The intelligence peddler was deeply puzzled. At that moment, Anderson retracted his gaze and looked down at Bart's. "Who told you about the secret island to the southwest that deviates from the main sea route?" Bart suddenly came to a realization as he looked at Danitz. "It's you." In the past few days, this information had only been sold to one person. "I was recognized so quickly." Danitz was momentarily at a loss as to how to respond. Anderson slightly lowered the pitch-black short sword in his hand, making the stabbing pain even more obvious. "Please respect the order of what is to come and follow." Bart's immediately felt as though his life was rapidly slipping away. He hurriedly replied, It was Vice Admiral Ailment." "When did she tell you?" "Why did she tell you?" Anderson asked without any surprise. "The night before the Black Death left Theros Island," Bart's replied quickly, afraid that he would die from excessive blood loss. "I didn't ask her why. Back then, I was only focused on admiring her beauty. She lives up to being the infamous ailment maiden of the 5 seas, even after a long time. Bart's couldn't hide his admiration of her, even when he recalled her while being in extreme danger. "Is this the charm of a demoness?" Anderson muttered to himself before asking, "Do you have a way to contact her?" "No." Bart's quickly shook his head and said, "She told me to take note of everyone who asked about her whereabouts. I'll tell her when she returns to Theros Island. And if anyone leaves the port after obtaining the information on that secret island, they shall be left alone to leave freely." "Is that so?" "Very reasonable." Anderson nodded and withdrew the short pitch-black sword. "Is there a trap?" "I don't know either," Bart's replied frankly. Anderson didn't say a word as he searched for the money on Bart's person and in the room. Then, he pointed at the intelligence peddler with his short sword. "I wanted to kill you, but no one will hate me if that's the case. Live well, curse me a few more times every day." He then turned around, walked to Danitz's side, and jumped down the window with him, disappearing into the dark, unlit night. Bart's touched his bleeding neck and stood up in fear. He ran to the window and confirmed that the two of them had disappeared. "Thankfully, I met a guy with mental problems. If not, I would be dead today." He closed the window and locked the wooden door. After carefully inspecting the room, he finally sat down and gulped down half a bottle of Lanti-Proof. In his tipsy state, Bart's collapsed onto the bed and fell asleep. Time ticked by slowly until it was 3 in the morning. Suddenly, Bart's flipped over and sat up. His eyes were bright and spirited, and he didn't even feel the slightest bit drunk. He found a dagger and pried open a wooden floor in the room. He took out a thumb-sized ball of paper. After the white paper unfolded layer by layer, there was a sticky black object in the middle. After taking a quarter of the blob, Bart's walked to the mirror in the room and was about to smear it. At this moment, he saw 2 figures reflected in the mirror. One of them was wearing a white shirt and a black vest with one of his hands in his pocket and the other carrying a short sword. The other wore a black cloak that didn't reveal his face. Just as Bartz's pupils dilated, Danitz punched the back of his head, causing him to faint. And his final memory was a voice with a smiling tone. He really didn't disappoint. After dealing with Bartz, Danitz bent down to pick up the sticky substance that had fallen to the ground. He chuckled and said, "This fellow actually believed you. He believed that you didn't kill him because you wanted him to hate you." The conversation he had with Anderson was actually a rehearsed play. It was to make it reasonable for Anderson to let Bartz go without being suspected. "This means that you acted sufficiently well," Anderson said with a smile. "It's truly different when you're acting as yourself." Dogs hit. Danitz cursed without any qualms. He then sighed. "I didn't expect him to be so patient. He waited past midnight before he took action. But we were more patient. If a hunter wants to capture his prey, he has to be patient. Sometimes, he can wait a few days," Anderson replied. To the two of them, there was actually nothing they could do. Be it a hunter and provoker, or pyromaniac and reaper, none of them were good at mediumship, much less having the ability to hypnotize others. In order to obtain information, other than interrogating and threatening others, they had to work hard on scheming. This is very reasonable, but in the future, it will be done with the words I use to school others. Danitz looked at the black sticky blob in his hand and said, "It seems like it should be applied on the surface of the mirror, before contacting Vice Admiral Ailment." That should be the case. However, what's the point even if we contact her? Are we going to ask her out on a date to join us for breakfast at Theros Island? Anderson mocked. Danitz knew that he and Anderson were unable to influence the person in the mirror. All he instinctively wanted to do was to do something more, so as to better complete the task that Gehrman Sparrow assigned him. He frowned slightly and said, "Then what should we do next?" "Of course it's to contact Gehrman Sparrow. Let him handle the aftermath. This fellow is very mysterious in every aspect, so he should have a way to resolve it," Anderson said with a TSK. "Besides, the mission he gave us is to seek out Vice Admiral Ailment's whereabouts. And there are results already now." Danitz acknowledged and began taking out the candles and other items for the ritual. "What are you doing?" Anderson asked with an odd expression. Danitz set up the altar without looking back. "Summoning Gehrman Sparrow's messenger." Anderson fell silent for a few seconds before saying, "I'll go out for a smoke first." Chapter 1096 Cooperation. At just past 6 in the morning, the entirety of Backlund remained dark. It was very quiet, with most areas being illuminated only by the street lamps. Wearing his pajamas, Klein sat on the bed and looked at Miss Messenger, who was carrying 4 heads. He rubbed his temples and asked helplessly, "Who sent the letter? Why couldn't he have a good night's rest?" The 3 heads in Rionette Tinker's hands replied one by one, "That particular, brainless, servant, of, yours, Danitz. He prayed in the middle of the night in the past, and now he's sending letters in the morning." Klein took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. Following that, he received the letter from Miss Messenger. When he opened it, his expression gradually turned solemn. This was because Danitz and Anderson's discovery of Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy's location was extremely untimely. According to Klein's deductions, it wouldn't take long for the pirate admiral and demoness of White Katarina to regain their freedom. They wouldn't be hiding much, making it easier to find them. Now that they had dealt with the intelligence peddler, Bartz, and obtained the items to contact Tracy from him, the greatest possibility was that they had frightened the target and made her continue hiding. Of course, Klein could seek the help of Queen Mystic Bernadette to find a way to lock onto Vice Admiral Ailment through the mirror. However, the problem was that he suspected that the target's hiding place was an important stronghold of the Demoness sect. It might even be the headquarters where there were Grade 0 sealed artifacts. This way, even if he had confirmed the whereabouts of Tracy, he wouldn't dare to teleport over to capture her. Hence, any contact would alert the pirate admiral. And if he didn't take the opportunity to contact her, regardless of whether Bartz was dead or alive, the news would spread after daybreak. Similarly, Tracy would be on guard. Seriously. However, this is also because Anderson and Danitz don't know the truth. They don't know the changes in the situation of the Lone Kingdom. After some thought, he said to Miss Messenger, who was waiting by the side, "Wait for me. I'll write a reply." He had originally planned to teleport over directly to decide what to do next, but after some consideration, he still chose to write a letter. Although he believed that Zeradal wouldn't waste time on an obvious bait like Danitz, he still felt that he had to be more careful. If Zeradal didn't do so, it didn't mean that the members of the secret order under him would do the same. Such a huge secret organization definitely had a few demigods at the saint level. Once he got entangled by the other party, it would be a huge problem. All right. The head carried by Rionette Tynker that had failed to speak previously rushed to answer first. Klein got out of bed, walked out of the bedroom, and came to the room outside. He took out a pen and paper and wrote fluidly, "Think of a way to make Bartz faint until dawn. Then, leave his room immediately and stay far away. There is a great danger lurking there. Monitor Bartz again when daybreak arrives, but don't alarm him." The so-called danger was a half-truth, and his main goal was to get Anderson and Danitz to leave the scene, so as to draw away any possible spying. Putting down the pen and looking through it again, he folded the letter and handed it to his messenger, Rionette Tynker, who had followed him out. At 3:10 a.m. in the Berserk Sea, Theros Island, Bartz's room. Danitz had just finished clearing the altar and wiping away the traces when he saw the terrifying messenger with 4 heads return. Gehrman Sparrow actually didn't come. Danitz reached out to receive the letter in surprise, then he took out a gold coin for the messenger. After the figure with 4 heads and dark, complicated long dress disappeared into the void, he opened the letter and quickly read through it. There's danger. Danitz's pupils dilated as he rushed towards the door as if he had been burned in the ass. After leaving the room, he said to Anderson, who was standing in the corridor with his back against the wall with an unlit cigarette in his mouth, "Quick, let's go. It's very dangerous here." "Did Gehrman Sparrow say that?" Anderson was taken aback as he asked thoughtfully. "Yes, how do you know? Couldn't it be that I discovered something?" Danitz replied instinctively. "You? Heh." Anderson chuckled and asked rather relaxed, "What else did he say? Aren't you nervous?" "Gehrman Sparrow is very reliable on such matters." Danitz's focus was completely off. Anderson fell silent for a moment before saying, "His messenger is more reliable. At least, within the few minutes of his messenger's return trip, there won't be any danger here. If there really was any danger lurking here, they would silently shrink back when they saw the messenger." Danitz originally wanted to reply that it may seem so in terms of her image, but for some reason, he instinctively gave up on that sentence. He switched to saying, "Gehrman Sparrow also said to let Bartz pass out until dawn so that we can monitor him again when the sun rises without exposing ourselves." Anderson frowned. "What does he want to do? There won't be any latent dangers anymore once the sun rises?" Without waiting for Danitz to respond, the strongest hunter of the Fog Sea turned around and entered the room. He took out a small metal bottle he carried with him and pulled out the stopper. He placed it at the tip of Bartz's nose and moved it back and forth. "It's done. Let's go." Anderson didn't hide his curiosity as he surveyed the area before leading Danitz out of Bartz's room and walked far into the distance. Backlund, Empress Borough, inside the Hall family's luxurious mansion. At 7:25 a.m., Audrey suddenly woke up from her dream. She dreamed of the boundless gray fog and dreamed of the world Gehrman Sparrow asking her to help hypnotize someone, making the target forget everything that had happened in the past 6 hours, as well as all the people who asked about a particular secret island. This is something that can be used as contributions needed for the manipulator potion formula and Beyonder characteristic. Also, Mr. World said that he would donate £7,000 for the war efforts. Audrey got off the bed very lightly and put a teal cloak over her white nightgown. Following that, she followed Gehrman Sparrow's instructions and set up a ritual, praying for Mr. Fool's bestowment. The illusory door quickly took shape and opened, sending 3 items flying out and landing on the altar. One of them was a thin human-skinned glove, the other was the instruction manual, on a piece of paper, and the other was a neat stack of cash that wasn't tied up. This is creeping hunger? Audrey scrutinized the altar and thanked Mr. Fool. Then, she put on the glove and, according to the instruction manual, activated the spirit of the traveler. When the glove turned transparent, the 12 sacred angels with fiery wings suddenly appeared in front of her. This is the angel's embrace that Mr. World has requested? Its effect is to interfere with divination and prophecy powers at the scene, so as to ensure that my identity won't be exposed. Audrey's eyes darted around as she changed the lie accessory which she had already prepared into a silver mask, and she wore it on her face. Following that, she followed the coordinates given by the World Gehrman Sparrow and began the teleportation step. During this process, the strange scenery of the spirit world and all kinds of strange creatures left a deep impression on her. However, before she could carefully observe them, she arrived at her destination. She saw that the colors were saturated, and the stacked scenes rapidly faded away, becoming normal. It was still late at night outside. It feels like I've recovered my feelings and mood from when I first entered the mysterious world. Audrey analyzed her mental state and focused her attention on the target lying on the floor in the room she was in. It was an unconscious man. The door to his body of heart and mind was rather weak, meaning that he was someone who could easily be charmed, even if it didn't involve beyond her powers. Hypnotizing such a target wasn't difficult for Audrey. However, in order to digest the potion, she decided to use dreams to help with the hypnosis. The unconscious Bartz had a dream. He dreamed of a blurry female figure. In his dream, he believed that she was the most beautiful woman in the world, a perfect state that Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy could achieve. Bartz wildly chased her as he ran back and forth in the wilderness, hills, and mountains. However, he couldn't catch up to her, as though he had left behind something very important. After an unknown period of time, he woke up from exhaustion and slowly recalled what had happened last night. He was in a bad mood because of him losing money. He had fallen drunk after drinking only half a bottle of Lanty Proof. Up to now, his temples were still throbbing in pain. I even knocked the back of my head. Bartz rubbed the swollen area and lumbered back to the bed. He fell into it and continued sleeping. And for Audrey, who had completed a milder form of hypnosis with the Dreamwalker's powers, she had long followed the World Gehrman Sparrow's instructions and restored the scene completely, leaving nothing suspicious behind. This was the ability of a senior spectator. Then, she teleported back to Backlund and sacrificed creeping hunger to Mr. Fool. The entire process didn't cause much of a stir. The Church of Evernight Beyonders in charge of protecting the Hall family were completely unaware. After dealing with all kinds of traces, Audrey pulled a bell and let the maidservants waiting outside enter. Her personal maidservant, Annie, gestured for the other maidservants to get busy as she said to Audrey, "Miss, there's a piece of news from the Bursary Foundation." "What news?" Audrey interpreted the shock, confusion, disbelief, joy, and curiosity in Annie's tone. Annie replied quickly, that Miss Eudora, who needed to have her leg amputated, has completely recovered. It's as though she was never injured. This is a medical miracle. Audrey was similarly stunned. She had some guesses, but she didn't dare to confirm them. She lacked sufficient clues and evidence. Also, all the patients with serious medical conditions have fully recovered. At this point, Annie couldn't control herself. She lowered her voice and said, "I heard that there was a ghost wandering around. Half of its face had mushrooms growing all over, and the other half was covered in weeds. It ate illnesses, trauma, and grief. I don't know if it's true, but it's scary." Mushroom. Weeds, Audrey repeated the 2 words, momentarily at a loss. Chapter 1097 Different Conundrum. Seeing that her mistress was clearly interested in ghost tales, Annie glanced at the other maids who were preparing hot water, combs, and other items. She continued, "The doctors and nurses wished to invite the church's bishop to host a mass, but the remaining patients strongly objected to it, They look forward to meeting that ghost. They all call it the clown angel. They say that its terrifying appearance resembles a specially dressed clown, but in actual fact, it's an angel who can resolve pain and torment. This title is very interesting, Audrey said with a faint smile. If it were in the past, she would definitely be very interested in this, perhaps eager to make a trip to the hospital via dream traversal to figure out what was going on with the so-called clown angel. However, the sudden eruption of the war made her feel rather depressed. She felt that there were too many important things that she needed to do, so she wasn't in the mood to probe further. In fact, if she hadn't experienced the air raid herself and seen those who were injured because of it, she would definitely feel like a war had never happened over the past few days and that Backland was still very peaceful. This was because, after that air raid, the airship fleet of the Lone Kingdom had been roped into the war effort. The air defenses of the coastal cities had all been raised, and Backland didn't suffer another attack again. Currently, the battle between Faysac and Lone was mainly focused in 3 places: the Winter County's Amantha Mountain Range, the heavy industry metropolitan area along the Mid-Seashire's east coast, and the few harbors along the Sonia Sea coast. Furthermore, they were in a deadlock with no side gaining an advantage over the other. Even if there were casualties, it didn't have any material impact on Backland. Other than the rise in prices with several editorial pieces in the newspapers, this city seemed to restore its peace in a few short days. However, Audrey didn't think so. Her father and brother have been busy with work recently, often returning late at night or convening a private gathering with a group of nobles, members of parliament, and clergymen. Through the other charity organizations in the Church of Evernight, she learned of the exact number of casualties at the front lines of Pritz Harbor and Amantha. She even saw some photos of the battlefield. She was working hard to gather funds, contacting various pharmaceutical companies and hospitals, hoping that she could organize help and treatment needed in the war effort. Who would have thought that the crazy adventurer has not only offered the excess food in his manor, but he has even donated £7,000 in cash. Audrey sighed secretly and began letting the maidservant help doll her up. South of the bridge, Rose Street. Emlyn White casually donated £10 to a charity organization's solicitor. He pressed his top hat and walked up the stairs, entering the Harvest Church. At this moment, there were no believers in the cathedral. Father Yatravsky, who looked like a half-giant, sat at the front and prayed sincerely. Emlyn was in no hurry to change into his priest robes. He sat beside the priest and wanted to say something, but when he opened his mouth, he ended up scoffing. It must be your typical Faysac appearance and figure that made those believers fearful of coming over, Emlyn said casually as he looked at the altar in front of him. Bishop Yatravsky put down his hands and opened his eyes. I can understand them. What's the point of understanding them? If the war gets more intense and the number of soldiers who die in the battle increase a bit more, the believers might rush in here and bomb the cathedral and hang you to death. Emlyn continued to look at the sacred emblem of life. Father Yatravsky shook his head slightly. No, they won't. They sincerely believe in the Earth Mother. They won't bomb the cathedral. At most, they will banish me. If I express that I've given up on my Faysac nationality, there will always be people who will understand and accept me. Emlyn sked and said without moving his gaze, what if Fainapotter joins in the war and attacks Desi Bay, Lone Territory? What if the Church of Earth Mother calls all clergymen to arms and become enemies with Lone? Are you going to obey the orders of the church and abandon the believers here, or are you going to pretend that you don't know anything? Continuing promoting how precious life is, how joyous the harvest is as you are now? Or, will you directly organize those believers to make them become enemies with their own kind, using blood and sacrifices to prove their faith? Bishop Yatravsky slowly looked at the sacred emblems of life up and above the altar, not saying anything for a long time. Emlyn didn't bring up any more questions as he fell silent like the priest. The entire Harvest Church was silent. On a colonial island, Alger Wilson, who hadn't had the chance to return to Pasu Island, didn't leave the Blue Avenger due to his principles of being cautious. He only sent his sailors to take turns to gather information. Captain, there still isn't any news about mustering us, a sailor reported to Alger of his findings of the day while reeking of alcohol. Alger waved his hand and dismissed his subordinate to leave the room. Then, he frowned slightly and muttered silently to himself, "The church doesn't seem to care much about this war." From what Alger knew, this was likely an intense war that would cover a huge scale. As the victim of an invasion, the Church of the Lord of Storms would definitely mobilize all its strength to defeat the enemy, including the captains, who were scattered across the sea, by giving them corresponding missions. However, at this moment in time, Alger had yet to receive orders from Pasu Island. This didn't mean that the Church of the Lord of Storms was slacking off. The activity of the Church's forces amongst the Lone Army and the air raid drills it was involved in the various major cities, and the activities of the demigods implied that the Church of the Lord of Storms was seriously resisting the invasion of the Faisak Empire. It was just that it wasn't going all out. Could it be that it's because we're still in the early stages of the war? The Church wishes to preserve a portion of its strength for the critical moment? Alger held back the stirrings in his heart and waited for further information. At night, another group of sailors returned with news that had nothing to do with the war. "Captain, there seems to be some kind of monster hiding on this island. Many pirates say that they encountered a terrifying situation when they head out to pee after drinking too much. Some of them were violently slapped by the branches of trees, while others saw fruits growing on their bodies, ones filled with blood and flesh in them. Some of them encountered skinny ghostly figures with wheat faces." A rather sober sailor described the rumors he had heard. Tales about ghosts and monsters. Alger didn't have the intention to probe into the truth of the matter. He nodded and sternly warned, "Don't go out at night." After such paranormal tales started in Backlund and Pritz Harbor, Klein never went to those hospitals again, afraid that he would directly meet Zeradal's marionettes. With the creeping hunger and the ability to travel, he expanded his range for creating terrifying tales. Sometimes, he would be in the Sonia Sea, at other times in the Fog Sea. He would go to Lenberg, sometimes to Fainapotter, and sometimes appear in places like East and West Balam, the Highlands and Valley. He didn't abide by any rules, and he relied solely on his momentary inspiration. He would visit some cities 2 or 3 times while not stepping foot into others even once. During this process, Klein felt an inexplicable strange feeling. In the terrifying darkness, invisible tentacles extended out, either searching for his whereabouts or attempting to predict his movements so as to intercept him ahead of time. They were silent and cold, and once they entangled him, the consequences were unimaginable. Klein knew that this might be the result of Zeradal's search. His best solution was to temporarily stop acting and to lay low in wait. However, it was also this subtle feeling that made him wish to digest the potion as soon as possible. Hence, he made use of the gray fog's powers. Every time he randomly chose a target location, he would go above the gray fog to divine the danger level and use paper angels to interfere. At this moment, with the huge progress in his digestion, he teleported to Kukua, which was in the northern state of West Balam. This was where he had killed Ince Zangwil to avenge himself and the captain. The moment his figure appeared in the white feather square, he suddenly sensed something amiss. The residence that belonged to May Sanchez was too quiet. It was so quiet that it sent chills down his spine. May Sanchez was a native general who had previously bought arms from Dwayne Dantes. He was a beyonder of the death pathway, and he was backed by the Church of Knowledge. What happened? Klein frowned slightly as he considered whether he should enter to confirm the situation. After all, that was his collaboration partner. Furthermore, if he were to encounter an enemy that wasn't weak, it would be a very good opportunity for him to act. After doing a self-analysis of the situation, he believed that if he could use a saint-level demigod as the main lead and create a few more horror tales, then his Bizarro Sorcerer potion would be digested for the most part. Of course, the prerequisite for everything is to be safe. I have to be careful and cautious. As he made his marionette, Konas Kilgore, transform into the appearance of Dwayne Dantes, he took out a gold coin. This time, the revelation he received was that there wasn't any danger. Strange. Klein didn't let his guard down as his body turned incorporeal before becoming a shadow that disappeared into the darkness of the night. As for his marionette, Kona's Kilgore walked slowly towards Mei Sanchez's mansion with his face facing down. This was the ability to hide in the shadows that creeping hunger provided itself. As for the other marionette, Enuni, he was waiting about 1,000 meters away. As for the few rats that belonged to the marionette, they were spaced out nearly 1,000 meters away from each other, but they were unable to do anything. Soon, Dwayne Dantes arrived in front of the general's residence and activated his spirit body thread's vision. What entered his vision were black illusory threads that were grown in a messy fashion. They seemed to come from different people, but they also had an obviously similar aura. And normal spirit body threads didn't exist at all. After a few seconds of silence, Dwayne Dantes extended his right hand and pushed open the closed door. The scene inside was completely different from what he remembered. The pillars that were covered with golden foils, the golden sculptures on the walls, and gorgeous stairs were now rolled into a bunch like a huge porcupine with golden spikes growing out of it. On the ground, there were sharp stone pillars and shattered glass everywhere. Apart from these, there were more illusory bookshelves in the hall that didn't appear real. There were pools of black shadows hidden in different spots on the bookshelf as they curled and stretched like eyes from time to time. As the door opened, the pool of liquid-like shadows suddenly came alive and produced the same sound, "It's you. My prediction was right. You're the one who can help me out of my conundrum." Chapter 1098 Contribution Accumulation. Upon hearing the words of the pools of black shadows, a figure suddenly appeared in Klein's mind. It was the elder in a white robe with inlaid brass lines. His hair was completely white and neatly combed. His pair of gray-green eyes left a deep impression on him. He claimed to be a member of the Church of Knowledge and that he was in charge of matters in West Balam and had a close relationship with Mei Sanchez. Back then, he had suddenly paid a visit to Dwayne Dantes, giving the excuse for his visit as him having predicted that he would be in a very troublesome situation in the future, and that someone he met during that time period would help him resolve the problem. After some thought, he slowly said, "Luca Brewster?" "Yes, it's me. You actually still remember me." In the different parts of the illusory bookshelves, the pool of liquid-like shadows rushed to answer. Their voices were no longer uniform. They were layered over each other, echoing endlessly. Even though he was separated by his marionette, Klein's ears still rang, and he felt a sense of dizziness. This isn't a normal sound. It contains a certain inclination towards losing control or experiencing mental corruption. The illusory bookshelves themselves are just for show. Just as this thought flashed through Klein's mind, he heard the black shadows curling and extending at the same time. "Sorry, I was too agitated just now and couldn't control myself." Hiding in the shadows outside the mansion, Klein controlled his marionette, Kona's Kilgore, and said, "What did you encounter? How did you end up like this?" The black figures sighed and said, "The adjudicator of the Phaenopotter military, Bella Costa, and the Church of Earth Mother's Archbishop, Martina, jointly attacked this place, with their main target being me. I had no choice but to activate my mythical creature form and make them temporarily retreat. Seeing as you entered without noticing anything, you must have teleported here. You're also a demigod. You should know that once you reveal your mythical creature form, it won't be easy for you to return to normal. I was also affected by inclinations towards going insane, and I nearly lost control. Fortunately, I was once a mysticism magister and had mastered many strange but effective mystic arts. Hence, I sealed myself to a certain extent at the critical moment and ended up like this. Sigh, this can only last for some time. The madness is still eating at me. I've already contacted the sea, and it wouldn't be long before a helper comes. However, I don't know if I can last that long. I was just thinking that this should be that very troublesome conundrum in the prophecy, and I was wondering if the person who could help me solve this problem would appear. I'm so happy that you're here. This proves that my prediction and interpretation wasn't wrong. This has improved my mental state. He really is a demigod who's determined to see his predictions succeed. If I were to turn around and leave at this moment, would you just break down and lose control on the spot?" After lampooning silently in his heart, Klein began thinking about the key information that was revealed by Luca Brewster. The Feyenopoder military and the Church of Earth Mother had begun taking action. He then got his marionette, Kona's Kilgore, to take out a gold coin and flick it before reaching out to catch it. From what he knew, the clergymen of the 7 churches were focused on maintaining order and ensuring the safety of their believers, regardless of the situation. From this angle, it was impossible for Luca Brewster to be a devil or a demon. As for the impression that Vice Admiral Iceberg and Detective Isengard Stanton gave him, it made him feel that the Church of Knowledge wasn't too bad. He felt that, other than their habitual discrimination against people with low intelligence and those who were not fond of studying, there was nothing wrong with their actions and style. This is also the reason why they're unable to develop and expand. They can only stay in a few small countries. Klein didn't look at the result from flipping the gold coin. He mumbled a few words before saying, "How can I help you?" The excited black shadows fell silent. A few seconds later, they said, "I don't know either." Klein looked at them, and they looked back at him in silence. Instantly, there was a mutual silence. "Why don't I suggest turning you into my marionette?" Nearly 10 seconds later, Klein lampooned inwardly. His thoughts raced as he began to think of a way to resolve the Luca Brewster's problem of not being able to recover from his mythical creature form. To be honest, his seriousness towards helping Luca out wasn't just because of his good impression of the Church of Knowledge and Wisdom, but also because of interests that could benefit him. Firstly, there was the inkling of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom's existence in the matter of Grozel's travels. At present, he was unable to determine the true God's goal. He felt that showing some goodwill might lead to pleasant surprises. Secondly, if Rozel's return really happened, the attitude of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom was rather important. From the Red Angel evil spirit's tone and manner of speech, Klein could make a preliminary judgment. Compared to the 4th epoch, the 7 deities of the present era had a drastic change in attitude towards the appearance of a Black Emperor. Their reaction wasn't as intense as before, and they were more inclined to tacitly approve of it, even if the person wasn't their own candidate of choice. Under such circumstances, if Emperor Rozel were to return, the only ones who would be against it would probably be the eternal blazing sun and the god of steam and machinery. After all, back when Rozel perished, they had been involved in the matter to some extent. However, this objection wouldn't be too strong either. As long as Rozel's mental state was normal and he escaped the corruption and madness, there was a chance of being accepted. After all, the Black Emperor didn't have the problem of switching with the Sun and Savant pathway, so there weren't any direct conflicts of interest. As for the original grudge, it wasn't too serious at the level of a deity. Of course, this was just a guess Klein made from his knowledge of ancient history and from the angle of mysticism. According to his understanding of the situation, other than the god of craftsmanship, the other 6 deities had been enemies with each other back during Solomon's First Empire. They had left behind countless grudges, and had no choice but to rope in the Black Emperor back then to help them. In the end, they've still put these matters behind them and formed an alliance that lasted to this day. Even the deities of neighboring pathways could coexist peacefully to a certain extent. As long as Rozel could really be revived, then as someone who wasn't completely dead, the feud between him and the eternal blazing sun and the god of steam and machinery could be resolved. Of course, with his understanding of Rozel, it was only a matter of time before Rozel took revenge. As long as he wasn't crazy and wasn't forced into a corner and wasn't extreme, he could still understand the situation clearly and know what to do and what it meant to wait for an opportunity. Under such circumstances, Klein believed that the ones who were able to suppress the eternal blazing sun and the god of steam and machinery when they expressed their objections and also make them tacitly agree to it were definitely the Lord of Storms and the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, because they and the eternal blazing sun were on beyonder paths that could be interchanged. I'm just afraid that the corruption that stems from the cosmos isn't that easy to resolve. The revived Rozel may end up completely turning into an evil god, but such matters can only be done one step at a time. Only by understanding the situation can one grasp the crux of the matter and decide whether to press the button at the final moment. Humans can't stop because of worries with low odds. If that's the case, nothing can be done. Even drinking a mouthful of water might lead to the descent of an evil god. Similarly, what are the reactions of the various parties towards Roselle's return, and how intense would they be? This will require me to wait and make further observations before I can find the most acceptable solution for everyone. At the moment, causing damage during the ritual at the critical moment has the highest chance of success. As his thoughts raced, Klein looked at the pool of dark shadows and slowly said, "How long can you last?" Luca Brewster observed his condition and said, 7 minutes. "I thought you were going to say 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, after lampooning," Klein said, "I'll get you a psychiatrist." As he spoke, he retreated a few hundred meters out of the shadows of May Sanchez's residence. Then, he set up a ritual and sacrificed creeping hunger above the gray fog. After doing all of this, he sat in the fool's chair, conjured Gehrman Sparrow's figure, and made him do a simple and quick prayer. At this moment, it was almost dawn. As for Audrey, who had been busy with charity work, she had yet to sleep. Treat a demigod who has shown signs of losing control. I can accumulate more merit points as well. Audrey put down the fountain pen in her hand and put on a white cloak with golden patterns. Just like the previous mission, she set up a ritual to receive creeping hunger and war lie, which was in the form of a silver mask. Under the protection of Angel's embrace, she teleported to the May Sanchez mansion in West Balam according to the map provided by Gehrman Sparrow. The difference this time was that, due to her facing a demigod, not only was she wearing a mask, she had also used lie to adjust her figure, aura, and appearance under the mask. Then, she saw Mr. World in the form of Dwayne Dantes. That demigod has broken down into pools of black liquid. Try not to communicate with his body of heart and mind directly. This will infect you with his inclination to lose control. If you can't treat him, I can lend you a Beyonder characteristic. Klein specially warned Miss Justice. Audrey didn't say that she was very clear about this. She was very professional in this aspect and listened attentively. Let me give it a try first. She tugged at the cloak covering her body and took a few steps forward, casting her gaze at the illusory bookshelves and the pools of black liquid. Thankfully, he hasn't truly lost control. After examining for a few seconds, Audrey said gently. Accompanied by her calm and powerful words, an invisible wind of placate began to blow. The frequency at which the pools of black liquid curled up and stretched began to decrease as the sense of anxiety weakened. Audrey used placate a few more times. It was only when Luca Brewster's mental state was completely stabilized and he had the ability to cooperate did she get him to open up his mind and receive the treatment. And she took the opportunity to open the door to the demigod's body of heart and mind. She split her use of placate into multiple treatments during the process of purifying the corruption. She planted psychological cues, cueing Luca Brewster into believing that everything was fine, allowing him to easily converge his mythical creature form and turn back into a human. The reason for splitting up the process was because if Audrey was affected by the slightest bit of corruption and the negative effects, then she would immediately retreat and resolve her mental problems first. Finally, she completed the treatment and cues before taking a few steps back. Your Excellency, you can remove your mythical creature form. The moment she finished speaking, the illusory bookshelves in the hall vanished. The pools of black liquid gathered together like life, taking on a human form. The black colors quickly faded away, turning back into Luca Brewster's original form. He sighed and said with a smile, "Thank you very much. When I saw a Sequence 5 spectator come over, I thought that I would become the main ingredient for her switching to another pathway. This old man's words are so direct. I don't even know how to respond to his words." Klein turned his head to look at Justice Audrey. He realized that her eyes were closed tightly. Klein opened his mouth to respond to Luca Brewster. "Don't worry. What you need the most right now is a set of clothes." Chapter 1099-1368 Lord of the Mysteries. Luca Brewster looked down at himself and hurriedly raised his right hand to grab something beside him. Then, his grayish-green eyes darkened. The gold that mixed with the stairs suddenly flew out and fused in midair, forming a thin piece of armor that then covered Luca Brewster. Luca stretched his arms and explained as he took in the feedback, Stiano's golden armor art. Its defensive capabilities are equivalent to that of a Sequence 5 Guardian. Stiano? Klein asked casually. Luca said in a tone as though he was introducing a famous historical figure, one of the earliest founders of the Moses ascetic order. I heard that Emperor Roselle had previously modified this golden armor art. I wonder what effects it eventually produced. I can roughly imagine. Maybe this golden armor has 12 different styles. After muttering inwardly for a while, Klein changed the topic to the main topic at hand. Will Phaenopotter and the Church of Earth Mother officially join the war? When Luca introduced the Stiano's golden armor, Audrey opened her eyes and turned her head in a controlled manner. Without any perturbation in her eyes, she looked at the glimmering demigod. Luca sighed and said, regardless of what they were thinking previously, they'll officially join the war tonight. Of course, they wouldn't target Lone for the time being. There's a high chance that they will attack either Lenberg, Mason, or Seeger. It's to prevent an extended battlefront and from making too many enemies, which would prevent them from being able to concentrate their strength. Furthermore, the Church of Earth Mother might not be willing to exert too much strength. After sighing, this demigod from the Church of Knowledge earnestly said to the silver-masked Audrey, "What kind of consultation fee should I pay you?" Audrey glanced at Mr. World beside her. He has already paid. Luca Brewster immediately shifted his gaze to Dwayne Dantes. Klein thought for a moment before saying, "Let me ask a few questions." "Please speak." At that moment, Luca didn't look like a demigod at all. Instead, he looked more like a professor waiting to answer his students' questions in class. Of course, if he could take off that set of golden armor and change into a three-piece suit, the resemblance would be uncanny. Without thinking, Klein directly asked, "What do you know about the corruption from underground?" In his opinion, if the Church of Knowledge, which was famous for being knowledgeable, knew about it, then he was definitely at a strong enough level to bear the effects. And if this wasn't suitable for Miss Justice's ears, then he believed that Luca would bring it up. After all, he wasn't merely a bookworm. As the discussion about the underground corruption stemmed from their experiences from exploring the sea of collective subconscious in Groselle's travels, Audrey had a certain understanding of it. At that moment, it didn't feel as though she couldn't understand anything. She was very focused on waiting for the demigod to give an answer. Luca frowned slightly and said, "I don't know much about it. It's as though just knowing about it will result in corruption in of itself." I've seen a sentence before in an ancient book, "The higher the sequence, the more dangerous it is to be closer underground." So the dragon of imagination Ankwelt left an extremely deep trauma and some kind of fear down there? Audrey instantly thought of the object sealed in the bronze door of the City of Miracles, Liveseed. She then looked at Mr. World beside her, but she didn't notice any changes in his expression. However, Klein made his marionette nod gently, so as to tell Miss Justice that the connections he made with were identical to hers. This made Audrey feel like she had returned to the past. Back then, she was still a low-sequence beyonder of the spectator pathway. There was no way she could decipher any useful information from Mr. World's expression and actions. The higher the sequence, the greater the threat of underground objects? This doesn't make sense. Realizing that Luca was unable to provide more information, Klein thought for a moment and said, "Second question, what prophecy do you have regarding this war?" With the mention of a prophecy, Luca Brewster suddenly became spirited. It's only the beginning. It's far from reaching its peak. Also, a greater portion of the damage stems from the war and is also present beyond the war. I don't know what it is exactly though. The war has just begun. Audrey's heart sank uncontrollably. Stems from the war and is also present beyond the war? Is it the apotheosis ritual of Amon's brother, or is it the advancement of the Black Emperor? Or perhaps, the return of Roselle? With a guess, Klein nodded and raised the third question. Have you heard of the prophecy of the apocalypse? How do you interpret it? Luca Brewster's expression instantly turned serious. No, this is not a prophecy. Anyone with the ability to predict the future is certain that the apocalypse will definitely come. God mentioned in his Holy Bible that the apocalypse will happen in the year 1368 in the fifth epoch. Of course, God also said that there will be a Savior. The prophecy of the God of knowledge and wisdom? 1368, there's only about 10 years left. Could the goddess's act of destroying the alliance with the god of combat to control the uniqueness of the death pathway have something to do with the impending apocalypse? Without realizing it, Klein's expression turned serious. However, he didn't show his reaction on the marionette's face. It will be the apocalypse in about 10 years. As for Audrey, she ruminated over the demigod's words in a daze. To be honest, she felt that it was fake. It was used by people who pretended to be mysticism experts and were religious cheats so as to deceive the people and earn money through that. Although she could foresee a large-scale war breaking out, she had never imagined that this world was very close to ending. This was the understanding of almost all ordinary people and beyonders. Why 1368? Klein couldn't help but ask. Luca Brewster shook his head. I don't know either. That's what God's prophecy says. At the thought that he was only a sequence 4, making him not have the ability to resist the apocalypse, Klein rationally ended the topic. He said to the saint of the Church of Knowledge and Wisdom, that shall be all. What he really wanted to ask were things that the other party probably didn't know either, matters like the corruption that stemmed from the cosmos, or whether Roselle could return or not, or what his state was. Luca Brewster nodded and said, in the future, if there's anything you need help with, you can come to me. For the details, find them out through Edwina. He remembered that Dwayne Dantes's firearms transaction with May Sanchez had been facilitated by Edwina Edwards. Edwina. Vice Admiral Iceberg? Audrey was taken aback for a second before coming to a realization. She glanced at Mr. World curiously. She remembered that she had read a newspaper article before. It contained the story of Gehrman Sparrow and the 3 female pirate admirals. All right. Klein was never worried about having too many helpers. After he nodded at Justice Audrey, Luca Brewster's figure quickly turned transparent, as though he had fused with the spirit world. Then, he disappeared. Looking at the spot where he had been standing earlier and then at the hall that no longer had any gold. Klein let out a terse remark inwardly and fell silent for 2 seconds. He then made his marionette look at Justice Audrey. I thought it would be a little more troublesome. That saint had saved himself in time and was willing to trust me, allowing me to plant a psychological cue, Audrey replied with a faint smile, trying her best to appear sincere and humble. Dwayne Dantes nodded and said, this help will be taken into account. Go back as soon as possible. It's very dangerous here. Seeing that a demigod had nearly lost control, Audrey had no doubts about the danger Mr. World warned her about. She immediately used creeping hunger and teleported back to the northern continent through the spirit world. After she sacrificed the human-skinned glove to Mr. Fool and settled the rest of the matters, Earl Hall and his eldest son, Hibbert, returned home. Just as Audrey was about to head out to meet her father and chat with him, she heard her mother, Lady Caitlin, ask in the hall, did something happen again? You came back a lot later than scheduled today. Earl Hall sighed and said, Feynepotter has invaded Lenberg. Extra. Extra. Feynepotter invades Lenberg. Leonard, who was wearing a pair of red gloves, got off the carriage. Just as he was about to enter St. Samuel Cathedral, he saw the paperboy waving a newspaper and running quickly across the streets and square. He stopped the paperboy and took out a penny and bought a newspaper. As he flipped through it, he said in a low voice, perhaps it won't be long before the South becomes a battlefield. That's right. Palaz Zorost's slightly aged voice echoed in Leonard's mind. But why am I still staying in Backlund? Leonard muttered in confusion. After advancing to Spirit Warlock, he had already become the captain of a Red Gloves team. The members had been transferred from other teams, including the familiar faces of Cindy and Bob. After the war broke out, Leonard had originally thought that his team would be transferred back to the Holy Cathedral like Soist's team, so as to participate in the battle at the Amantha Mountain Range. To his surprise, he was arranged to be used as a reserve force for the Backlund Diocese. As for this large city, due to its implementation of a nighttime curfew and other emergency policies, its security was good, and there weren't many Beyonders who came out to cause destruction. Even the devils who liked to murder didn't create chaos. It made Leonard rather free, making it more relaxed for him than during non-wartime duty. At that moment, Palaz Zoroast smiled and said, "I have a guess." "What guess?" Leonard hurriedly asked in a low voice. "I'm not telling you now," Palaz replied leisurely. Leonard didn't say a word. He straightened his collar and entered St. Samuel Cathedral. He exchanged a few words with the Archbishop and prayed for 5 minutes. Then, he went underground and pushed open the door to his Red Gloves team's temporary office. "Good morning, Captain." Bob, Cindy, and the other Red Gloves all stood up and bowed. Upon hearing their greetings, Leonard, who felt that he was already used to it, was once again in a daze. In the blink of an eye, it was Monday afternoon. Leonard arranged for his team members to go on separate missions, and he found a lounge to wait for the gathering to begin. 1. Reference to Saint Seiya, Knights of the Zodiac. Chapter 1101. Book above the boundless grey fog, inside the ancient palace that resembled a god's residence. Dark red beams of light shot up from both sides of the long bronze table, materializing into blurry figures. Justice Audrey immediately stood up, lifted her skirt, and curtsied towards the seat of honor. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." She wasn't in a bad mood, but with everything that had happened recently, she couldn't keep her spirits up like before. After all the members bowed and took their seats, Audrey swept her gaze and habitually began observing. Almost instantly, she discovered that Ma'am Hermit's mental state and body language indicated that she was worried about something. It has something to do with Queen Mystic? Or could it be that there are other problems? Or could it be that both factors are involved in the matter? Audrey was slightly surprised, and she curiously considered the possible reasons for this. After so many tarot gatherings, she had long drawn a psychological portrait of Ma'am Hermit. She believed that she was a rather contradictory Beyonder. She was experienced, knowledgeable, and calm. She was also bold and reckless in certain aspects, like a young girl who had yet to mature. Combined with the relationship between the other party and Queen Mystic, Audrey's interpretation of this analysis was that, although Ma'am Hermit had experienced a lot, she had managed to resolve many problems successfully with Queen Mystic's protection and arrangements. Deep in her heart, she was still a young girl who yearned to be loved and cared for. And it was precisely within such a concealed state that Audrey boldly guessed that, when facing someone who had been abandoned, and one who didn't commit any serious mistakes, she would unknowingly show mercy, pity them, and help them. At the same time, due to her being a woman who was active at sea, with the strength of Sequence 5 who also had quite a number of mystical items, experience, and knowledge, while wearing heavy glasses and having interactions with Gairman Sparrow, Audrey believed that if she casually flipped through the wanted posters and newspapers related to pirates, she would be able to confirm Ma'am Hermit's identity without a doubt. However, she deliberately didn't do this. She only had a general idea as to her identity. No, Ma'am Hermit should already be a Sequence 4 demigod, so there shouldn't be too many things for her to be worried about. It's definitely not because of the war. It's impossible for a powerful pirate to be too troubled over it. As her thoughts raced, due to her lack of knowledge, Audrey had no clues apart from guessing that it was related to Queen Mystic. And at this moment, there were two matters echoing in Catlia's mind. Why did Her Majesty send so many diary pages over? If I hadn't become a mysticologist and grasped certain secret techniques, I wouldn't have been able to memorize all of them in such a short period of time. What exactly happened? Has the Queen fallen into some sort of dilemma? That fellow, Frank, actually didn't want to hold a ritual and wanted to directly consume the potion. Thankfully, I stopped him. However, the druid ritual isn't difficult for him at all. Being aware of the behavior and physical structure of various ordinary animals and 3 kinds of extraordinary creatures. As a crazy biologist, he has already done his homework in advance by trying to crossbreed plants and animals. Next week, he will become a druid in the next 2 days. What he needs to do is write down all the knowledge and experience that he has built up as part of the ritual, Amidst her thoughts, Katlia shelved her concerns and turned to the end of the long bronze table. She lowered her head and respectfully said, "Honorable Mr. Fool, I have found an entire book of Roselle's diary this time." An entire book. Upon hearing Ma'am Hermit's words, all the members, including the hanged man Alger, were clearly stunned. This was something that exceeded their understanding. In the past, submissions ranged from 1 to 3 pages at a time. This time, it was an entire book. Did something happen? Even though he was the least concerned about such matters, the slowest to react, the son Derek, had noticed something unusual. They all knew that Queen Mystic Bernadette was the eldest daughter of Emperor Roselle. It was normal for her to be able to provide an entire diary. However, it was abnormal for her to give an entire book. Katlia ignored everyone's gazes and continued, "These diary pages aren't connected, but they all originated from Emperor Roselle's later years." Very good. The fool Klein nodded slightly, indicating that the hermit could begin conjuring them. One page after another, the slightly yellow pages of the diary took shape, and soon, it was stacked into one book. After receiving it, he casually flipped through it. Without reading it, he put down the diary and looked at the hermit Katlia. "You can raise your questions now. Including the contributions you previously accumulated, you can ask a total often questions." He didn't read the diary carefully, because there were too many pages this time. There were at least 30 pages to read. It would require the members of the Tarot Club to wait for too long, affecting Mr. Fool's image, therefore, he planned to read it slowly after the gathering ended. 10. Katlia immediately felt a headache. This was because there were only 2 questions that Queen Mystic had asked her to raise. She deliberated for a moment before saying, "Honorable Mr. Fool, can we split the questions into multiple sessions?" "Sure." Klein nodded with a smile. This was convenient for what he had in mind. To answer 10 questions at once was also a very difficult task for Mr. Fool. Katlia secretly heaved a sigh of relief. There are 2 questions this time. First, why does one need to be careful of the spectator? Be careful of the spectator? Audrey wore a blank look. For a moment, she was unable to find any leads for coming up with a guess. She even examined herself. Be careful of the spectator? The Moon Emlyn, the Star Leonard, and the other members of the Tarot Club all cast their gazes at Miss Justice. The fool Klein chuckled and leisurely said, "A spectator always likes to hide in the shadows to secretly control certain matters, making it difficult for people to notice and be on their guard. In particular, one needs to be especially careful towards Angel of Imagination Adam. His apotheosis ritual is to consume the potion when the trend of the times follows what he envisioned. The trend of the times that follows what he envisioned. Allow the development of the times to meet his expectations?" Justice Audrey couldn't help but ask Mr. Fool. Klein nodded slightly and said, "That's right. A war that sweeps the entire world is exactly what Adam wants. This." The hanged man Alger, the hermit Katlia, and the other members of the Tarot Club were bombarded by the information divulged by Mr. Fool, and their minds were momentarily incapable of thought. Be it the apotheosis ritual or the trend of the times, all of them involved a very, very high level. It was so high that they could only look up at it. Suddenly, they vaguely understood the reason why the psychology alchemists were deeply involved in the royal family's conspiracy. And the members who knew of the Twilight Hermit Order further understood the essence of keeping the trend of the times on track. Only an existence at Mr. Fool's level can understand these secrets and participate in the corresponding game. Alger quickly found his train of thought and sighed inwardly. He was increasingly eager to become a demigod. He believed that this war would bring him plenty of opportunities, but he didn't know if he could seize them. The members of the Tarot Club were silent. As their thoughts ran through their heads, the fool Klein let out an inexplicable sigh. This was because he had no way of stopping this war. If it was only the matter of making George Ill's Black Emperor ritual fail, he could jump through some hoops and stretch himself out to affect it slightly. However, in this war involving the trend of the times, even if he was an angel, a sequence 1 angel, there was no way he could affect the overall situation. Forcibly trying to stop it would only squish him under the rolling wheels of history. Apart from Adam, who has spent 1 to 2,000 years arranging for such a plot to play out, the rest of them, even the kings of angels, can only change certain situations but not the overall trend. Only a true deity at sequence 0 can truly participate in this game. It's no wonder the emperor said that only by becoming a god can he protect those who he wants to protect. The only thing I can do now is to make preparations for the resistance in the Rorstad archipelago. I hope they have the opportunity of being liberated from being colonies. Klein reined in his thoughts and made his gaze maintain a smiling look. He wasn't blindly opposed to everything about war. The education he had received in his previous life, and what he had seen at sea and in East and West Biyao, had made him have a supportive attitude towards overthrowing colonial rule. To put it simply, what he didn't like and abhorred was an unjust war. Sensing Mr. Fool's gaze, the hermit Katlia controlled her chaotic thoughts and said again, "Secondly, where is the secret mausoleum that Emperor Roselle has yet to discover?" Secret mausoleum? Yet to be discovered? Furs became more focused as she felt that this was material for a best-selling novel that possessed all kinds of popular elements. On the other hand, Audrey and Alger could acutely sense something from this question. The eldest daughter of Roselle probably wasn't willing to accept her father's death, and was still searching for traces left behind by him, hoping to find clues to revive the emperor. Of course, they couldn't eliminate the possibility that there were other important items in the secret mausoleum. That might be Queen Mystic's goal as well. Roselle even left behind a secret mausoleum? I wonder what's inside. The Star Leonard and Judgment Zio were more concerned about this. The fool Klein was already prepared for this. He smiled and said, "Perhaps in the Fog Sea, in the secret primitive island Roselle discovered, or the Abyss." Abyss. Emlyn immediately felt his eyelids twitch. In the history of the Sanguine, there were many records of second epoch devils wreaking havoc. Even when he read those materials after thousands of years since it happened, he still felt himself turn impetuous and become entangled by chaos. The son Derek had a similar feeling as him, but he didn't think too much about it. When reading certain documents, his mental state would be overexerted, and his mental state would unknowingly be affected. This was common knowledge known by everyone in the City of Silver, so he had to first receive general education and listen to a teacher's recount. Abyss. Audrey, Zio, and company subconsciously repeated that term in their hearts. In their daily lives, the abyss was an abstract expression. It was synonymous with danger, pain, decadence, and corruption. They never expected that it really existed somewhere in the Fog Sea. Chapter 1101 Special Reward. Katlia also didn't return to her senses for a few seconds. She never expected Emperor Roselle's secret mausoleum to involve the abyss. However, after some careful thought, she realized that it wasn't surprising that a conflict at that level would involve something like that. For a moment, she hoped that the Queen wouldn't pursue this matter, but in the end, she suppressed this thought to the bottom of her heart. She felt that if it were her, then she would also make the same choice. All sorts of thoughts flashed through her mind as she bowed towards the end of the long, model table. "Thank you for your answer. I have no further questions today." The fool nodded slightly and surveyed the area. "You may begin." Just as he finished speaking, Furs, who had been mustering her courage all this while, said as she closed her eyes as though she had resolved herself to charge towards death, "Mr. World, I have a commission for you." Seeing the World Gearman Sparrow look over, she hurriedly explained, "You don't have to do much. You'll just leave me at an unfamiliar place every once in a while, and you can pick me up after a few days. If you're really busy, you can present traveling to me several times at a particular point in time for me to record." Upon hearing Miss Magician's words, the first thought that came to Klein's mind was, man versus wild? "I have too many suitable places, such as the battlefield of the gods on the easternmost front of the Sonia Sea, Calderon City in the spirit world, the City of Miracles Liveseed in Groselle's travels. They're 10 times, 100 times, or even 1,000 times more dangerous than the wilderness. I'm just afraid that Miss Magician won't be able to handle the danger." Klein didn't let the World Gearman Sparrow immediately answer. He controlled the fake person and cast its gaze on Miss Magician with a pressuring look. Furs silently took a deep breath, calmed her emotions, and added in more detail, "This is the thing, I'm a Sequence 6 scribe of the apprentice pathway now. In order to digest the potion, aside from recording all kinds of Beyonder powers, I still need to record down the local customs and traditions of different places. I hope that I can become a traveler as soon as possible. Only then can I avoid most of the dangers during the war. Mr. World, I've only recorded traveling once, so I won't be able to return if I go somewhere else. I can only ask for your help. I wonder if you're interested, and what kind of payment you'd wish to receive." So that's how it is. Justice Audrey finally came to a realization. Furthermore, she felt that Furz's method was really great. Especially since she's a best-selling novel author, her act of recording scenery and customs and publishing it as a book should be able to greatly aid in her potion digestion rate. Audrey nodded silently as she felt sincerely happy for her friend. However, as a senior spectator, how could she not sense Furz's horror and fear towards Mr. World? She was looking forward to knowing what would happen when the two of them formally interacted. "Audrey, this state of mind isn't good. However, this is the attitude of a spectator. Furz definitely wouldn't expect that the so-called crazy adventurer she fears is only a mask. Beneath it is a gentle and kind heart. I also have to work hard to digest the Dreamwalker potion. I should visit the dreams surrounding me every night." Audrey didn't show any changes in her expression or gaze as she maintained the attitude of a spectator. After the hanged man Alger heard the magician's words, he sighed. This was because even this apprentice was beginning to break through to Sequence 5, while he was still stuck at that level. The world and the hermit are already at Sequence 4, Justice, the sun, the moon, and the star are also all at Sequence 5. Apart from the magician, the newly joined judgment is lower than my sequence. As his thoughts churned, Alger felt that stifled, a heavy feeling that was difficult to resolve. He wished he could immediately find an opportunity to make contributions and become a demigod, a cataclysmic interrer. He yearned to have a high position and be in a position of power. He wanted others to acknowledge and respect him and be submissive to him. He didn't wish to fall behind in the tarot club. Is that so? At the same time that Klein understood what Miss Magician was thinking, he suddenly recalled something. It was the identity that the other party had mentioned in front of Mr. Fool during a particular full moon. An ex-surgeon who was now a novelist. Will spreading the terrifying legends that I create into text form help me digest the Bizarro Sorcerer potion further? The more shocking, harrowing, terrifying, and incomprehensible the description in the novel is, the better the effects. Klein suddenly had inspiration and controlled the world Gehrman Sparrow to say, "This commission is very simple, but the payment I need is very special." Upon hearing that Mr. World was inclined to agree, Furz asked in both joy and anxiousness, "What's the payment?" The world Gehrman Sparrow pondered for a moment and said, "Collect information about the ghost stories that have happened recently in the various major hospitals in Backlund, and write them into a small publication or have them published in the newspapers. The requirement for the novel is that it's even more terrifying and bizarre. It's best if it can be a best-selling novel." The reason why he only mentioned the matters of the major hospitals in Backlund was because Miss Magician was a local author who was part of medical circles. Being able to come to know of the urban myths and use that as material for a novel was very reasonable, and it wouldn't incur suspicion. However, if she had even learned of the urban myths in the Rorstad Archipelago, Fog Sea, and East and West Balam, then Zeradal's marionette would definitely visit her. The ghost tales of the various hospitals in Backlund. After hearing the world Gehrman Sparrow's words, Audrey was stunned for nearly 3 seconds. She had originally thought that those rumors were caused by the church's Beyonders secretly treating the injured victims. Mushroom and weeds were the negative effects of the mystical items, but she never expected it to be something else. Audrey had also guessed if it was done by Dwayne Dantes. After all, this gentleman had heard from her about the victims of the air raid. Furthermore, he was a very kind gentleman. However, due to the lack of clues and evidence, she could only believe that it was more likely to be related to the church. At this moment, she was almost certain that the clown angel was Mr. World Gehrman Sparrow. Even if it wasn't, they definitely had a deep connection. A Mr. World who wears a mushroom and weed mask is the same as the Gehrman Sparrow who wears a crazy adventurer mask. Why does he act like that when he's doing something good? Is it because he needs the feeling or corresponding feedback from creating fear? Audrey thought to herself with some guesses. As for the star Leonard and the hanged man Alger, one immediately thought of the strange urban myths that the Nighthawks who belonged to St. Samuel Cathedral were discussing recently, while the other fell deep into thought about the horror stories his subordinates had heard or encountered. I've never really heard of such payment before. It's not like I'm writing a biography. Although there has been a recent war, the sales of newspapers and novels seem to have increased. My previous editor has been urging me to write a new book. Yes, I must keep my identity a secret. I have to convince my editor to change my pen name. The excuse is that novels of different styles should use different pen names. Furs didn't think too much about it. After a slight period of deliberation, she agreed, all right, no problem. The World Gehrman Sparrow chuckled and hoarsely said, if you do well, I'll give you the opportunity to record the beyonder powers of a demigod. No problem. Furs swept away her usual languidness and firmly replied. To her, recording a demigod's powers not only increased her ability to protect herself, but it could also effectively help her digest the potion. This also made Audrey, Zio, Leonard, and the other members sigh in their hearts. Scribes were truly enviable. Once a demigod-level expert became a backer, a scribe wielded extremely powerful strength. They wouldn't be weaker than a sequence 5, or may even be stronger than one at times. After coming to an agreement, the scene fell silent for a moment. This was because the other members of the Tarot Club currently didn't have any requirements. Leonard had become a spirit warlock recently, and he had yet to conclude the acting principles. There was still the possibility of him advancing from within the Church of Evernight. As for mystical items, he had already bought the Word of the Sea. If there were any special circumstances, he could request to use sealed artifacts of the Church. Emlyn was reading the Sanguine's research information regarding the Moon Domain every day, hoping to make a Scarlet Scholar more practical. As for the Sequence 4 Shaman King's potion formula and beyonder ingredients, he didn't need them for an extensive period of time, nor could he afford them. Derek had recently mastered the powers of Priest of Light, and he was still very far from advancing. As for the unshadowed main ingredient, he had already obtained it. Similarly, Audrey and Zio had also recently advanced. One of them was working hard to help Mr. World, accumulating contribution points, while the other was burdened with a huge debt and was eager to repay it. Alger was in the Church of the Lord of Storms, so he had to keep a secret. He was currently in an awkward position which required him to find a chance to advance. Furthermore, he had obtained the Cataclysmic Interr's potion formula from the world. Catlia had just become a demigod. She was currently deep in research on all kinds of secrets and all sorts of mysticism knowledge. She was pleasantly surprised that, despite having recently advanced, just recalling the knowledge and secrets she knew from the past had allowed her to directly digest quite a bit of the potion. Amongst them, the various things she had heard from the Tarot Club had contributed greatly. The transaction segment quickly ended as the members began their free exchange. Emlyn surveyed the area and his gaze landed on Leonard's face. If you're an official beyonder, how will you deal with a clergyman of an opposing faction in your area of jurisdiction? He hasn't done anything wrong, nor does he plan on doing anything wrong. Although Fainapotter had yet to start a war with Lone, they had invaded Lone's ally, Lenberg. This made the believers and citizens living around the Harvest Church look at Bishop Yutravsky in an increasingly odd manner. Leonard thought carefully and said, "Protective custody." Chapter 1102 Engaging Tigers to Hunt Wolves. Protective custody. That's quite a witty answer. As expected of a newly promoted Red Gloves team captain. When the fool Klein heard the star Leonard's answer, he couldn't help but laugh inwardly. He knew very well who Emlyn was referring to, and he knew quite a bit about Bishop Yutravsky, who wished to be called a priest. He didn't really believe Emlyn White's claim that he hasn't done anything wrong, nor does he plan on doing anything wrong. This was because, to a deity's blessed or a zealot, their understanding of something wrong might be different from a normal person's. Of course, Klein never suspected Father Yutravsky's claim that life was precious and his piousness an acknowledgement of a joyous harvest, but the problem was that the Church of Earth Mother also preached that lives were like plants, which would ultimately wither and die, returning to the embrace of the Earth Mother. They would then grow again when the next year came. A qualified bishop of the Church of Earth Mother wouldn't treat death in the same manner as the most ordinary of people. Regardless, Father Yutravsky has to be controlled. This is both a form of protection for the Earth Mother's believers, as well as the citizens around him. It's also a form of protection for this half-giant bishop, in case some irredeemable situation occurs. While Klein was thinking to himself, Leonard, who had no lack of understanding of the Harvest Church, also understood the meat of Emlyn's question. He planned on leading his team members to confirm the situation in the next 2 days, taking the Earth Mother's blessed into protective custody with the help of the official organizations that were in charge of the area south of the bridge. And when Emlyn heard the answer, he slowly nodded without saying a word. Seeing that he was silent, Leonard turned to ask a question he wanted to get some feedback on. Are there any major matters lurking beneath Backlund recently? What he really wanted to ask was why his Red Gloves team had been left behind in the capital of capitals as a part of the reserve forces. As soon as he finished speaking, the other members of the Tarot Club, including the son Derek, who wasn't too concerned about matters of the outside world, all cast their gazes at the World Gehrman Sparrow. From what they knew, whenever something happened in Backlund, Mr. World would more or less give a warning. What major matters has been lurking beneath Backlund recently? There's plenty. The Black Emperor ritual of George III, my secret alliance with Queen Mystic, the 3 churches may seem to be tacitly in approval but all have different attitudes. As Klein's thoughts raced, he suddenly understood what Leonard wanted to ask. After all, they would occasionally communicate privately. That's right. Why was Leonard left in Backlund? Because of me, the church doesn't want to put Leonard in a dangerous situation? Am I thinking too highly of myself? Klein secretly shook his head and rejected the thought that first came to him. He quickly changed his train of thought and analyzed the problem on matters that Leonard could be of service. Leonard is only a sequence 5, so what use can he play in Backlund that has deep undercurrents? Even if he's of use, they wouldn't use him. Instead, they would make use of me, who's related to him, or Palaz Zoroast. This can rule me out. I'm still a qualified blessed at the moment. If I really needed to do anything, then a simple instruction would suffice. The clearing of the Amon avatars in Backlund last time made the goddess or the upper echelons of the church guess that Palaz Zoroast is hiding in the vicinity of Backlund Street, and they ended up suspecting Leonard? There's a possibility, and it's not a low one either. Back then, I was concerned to some extent. I only believe that, in the case of Amon becoming a god, the church and Palaz Zoroast were on the same page, that they could form some sort of tacit understanding. In fact, I believe that Grandpa had such considerations when he first chose Leonard as a target for parasitizing. But why is Palaz Zoroast being kept in Backlund? To fish for Amon? Even among the kings of angels, Amon ranks among the top. It's almost impossible for the goddess to engage in a divine descent. With the church's angels, grade 0 sealed artifacts, and Palaz Zoroast, it shouldn't be difficult to expel Amon, but it's almost impossible to kill him, unless he doesn't come with his actual body. But in that case, it's not worth making such arrangements. Klein's thoughts quickly developed, and soon, he had a new idea. Fishing for Amon isn't done so as to deal with him. Instead, it's to hold back Zeradol, who's currently in Backlund. Similar pathways could be interchanged at high levels. Even if one became a true god at sequence 0, they'd still have a strong desire for the uniqueness and sequence 1 beyond her characteristics of neighboring pathways. On this point, the Evernight goddess's plan was excellent evidence. The goddess wants to make Backlund into a potpourri mess before wiping them all out. Klein made the World Gehrman Sparrow hesitate for a few seconds before saying, the leader of the secret order, a Sequence 1 angel, and an old friend of Emperor Roselle, Zeradal, is currently hiding in Backland. Seeing that the members of the Tarot Club were clearly a little confused and perplexed, the world added in a hoarse voice, "The law of Beyonder characteristics conservation we often refer to often refers to the conservation of Beyonder characteristics of neighboring pathways. In other words, similar pathways also obey the law of convergence of Beyonder characteristics." Leonard immediately fell into deep thought. After a few seconds, he deliberated and asked, "The Marauder and the Seer pathways are neighboring pathways?" "Yes, the Apprentice pathway is also a neighboring pathway," the world answered frankly. Upon hearing their conversation, Furs first connected the law of convergence of Beyonder characteristics to the attraction between Beyonder characteristics taught to her by her teacher, Dorian Gray Abraham. She connected it to the Saint of Secrets who had been attracted. Then, she began to consider a question. If it really is as Mr. World said, that Beyonder characteristics of neighboring pathways attract one another, then would it have attracted the attention of Zeradal back then? After all, he is in Backland. All of a sudden, Furs thought of the raven that was staring at Bodhi's back. Furs hurriedly raised her hand, indicating that she had something to say. Seeing all the members looking over, she hurriedly said, "My teacher is a member of the Abraham family. He wields a rather important sealed artifact." As the first part of the sentence was known by the other members other than the star, Furs had no intention of hiding anything. As for the second half of the sentence, she had made some modifications. It was very important to change the phrase to rather important. Seeing that no one was raising any questions, Furs continued, "This causes him to occasionally encounter high sequence Beyonders of the Apprentice pathway. Previously, when he came to Backland, the Aurora Order's Saint of Secrets, Bodhi's, had appeared nearby. As for me, I noticed that a raven was looking in the direction where Bodhi's was heading." A raven. The details of the foggy town surfaced in Klein's mind. At the top of the pitch-black cathedral, there were ravens flying around, as if they were holding a memorial or in grief. As for Zeradal's avatar, it was hidden inside the cathedral. Zeradal is used to using ravens as marionettes? Is this a mark left behind during his phase as a bizarro sorcerer? While in thought, Klein made the world speak. That might very well be Zeradal. I actually met a Sequence 1 angel. Furs felt a sense of fear and horror. She then recalled how she and Zio had discussed Adam and thus ended up possibly targeted. For some reason, she had the illusion that she had become the protagonist of a novel. Despite being only a Sequence 7 or 6, she had established connections with the Kings of Angels and Sequence 1 angels. With this in mind, Furs hurriedly turned her head to Miss Justice and said, "Can you hypnotize me later into forgetting certain matters? I'm afraid that I might accidentally recall something and attract attention." "No problem." As Audrey answered, she glanced at Zio and nodded at her. As for the star Leonard, he had some ideas as well. He planned on discussing it with Old Man when he returned to hear his opinion. Klein didn't continue talking about the major matters that lurked beneath Backland. This was because they were just too high-end for the other members of the Tarot Club. Not only were they unable to participate in it directly, but even having a complete understanding of them could bring about a disaster upon themselves. In this aspect, Klein's idea was that he could get the help of the members of the Tarot Club in certain segments, but it was like commissioning a bounty hunter to do something, without getting them too involved in the matter and figuring out the reason for the commission. It was a form of protection for them. At this moment, Alger looked around and said, "According to my observations, the Church of Storms isn't too enthusiastic about this war." "They aren't too enthusiastic?" "This doesn't match the image of the Church of the Lord of Storms. Although their teachings don't advocate combat and don't promote war, they definitely emphasize the need to treat their enemies like a storm, and vent whatever anger they have on the spot." When Klein heard this, he felt a little surprised. He then combined his understanding of the deities and began his preliminary analysis. "According to my previous speculations, Storm, Sun, Reader, Spectator, and Shepherd can switch paths at high levels. There should be an immense conflict between them. As for the Lord of Storms, he is highly likely the wind angel of yesteryear. He had eaten Adam's father, the ancient sun god, the city of silver creator. Even if he had tacitly allowed George III to become Black Emperor, it's impossible for him to sit back and watch Adam make use of the flood of the times to ascend to divinity. Therefore, the Church of the Lord of Storms is unwilling to have the war increase in scope and allow it to turn into a world war. Hence, he is trying hard to control his impulse. It must be really hard on them. This can explain why Lone and Intis would maintain their strange silence when Fanapotter invaded Lenberg, Mason, and Seeger. The Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun and the Church of the Lord of Storms are probably in a difficult position. They're unable to make up their minds. On the one hand, at the level of the deities, it isn't that there is no possibility of abandoning their alliance to deal with the Church of Knowledge. On the other hand, the battle strategies at the national level also prompts them to protect those countries. Forcefully breaking the perceptions built up by the citizens of a country would be an act that causes the anchors to become unstable. Also, once they participate in the battle, they would help Adam fulfill the conditions of his advancement to Sequence 0. Klein deliberately made the world silent for a moment before replying to the Hanged Man's intelligence. At present, this is inevitable. Chapter 1103 Hin/Bia Klein didn't actually remember if he had told the Hanged Man and the others that the Sailor, Spectator, Sun, Reader and Secret Suppliant pathways were interchangeable, unless he used dream divination to recall it. However, since the Hanged Man had expressed his doubts towards the Church of the Lord of Storms, it meant that he hadn't thought about the interchangeability of both paths. Regardless of whether he knew it or not, or if he had yet to connect the two matters together, Klein believed that there was a need for him to explain things clearly. This allowed the members of the Tarot Club to grasp the true stances of the various major factions, thus letting them avoid many dangers. After the Hanged Man, Alger, and the others cast their gazes at him, he controlled the World Gehrman Sparrow and made him say in a low, uncertain tone, "The Storm, Sun, Spectator, Reader, and Secret Suppliant pathways are neighboring pathways. Likewise for Evernight, God of Combat and Death. And neighboring pathways often become enemies. Of course, that's not absolute. At least the 7 deities have established an alliance." Upon hearing the world's reply, Alger first recalled Adam pushing for the flood of the times to become a god. Following that, thoughts flashed through his mind as he gained a certain level of understanding of the Church of the Lord of Storms' current attitude. This made him feel a rather special sense of superiority and joy. It was as if he had seen the essence of the matter, exceeding the level of most Beyonders in the Church of the Lord of Storms. Similarly, Audrey had a brand new understanding of Intis's strange silence in this war. She was even more worried about the situation in Lenberg, Mason, and Seeger. In addition, she also knew that she could switch to Unshadowed, Cataclysmic Interror, and to the corresponding sequence for Demigod of the Church of Knowledge and Wisdom she had recently met. As for the corresponding sequence 4 of the Secret Suppliant pathway, it wasn't within her considerations at all. Of course, compared to other pathways, she still preferred Manipulator. She liked the Spectator pathway from the bottom of her heart. However, she also felt deep fear towards the upper echelons of the Spectator pathway. Vin Rambus had left a rather bad impression on her. Adam's any mention of it will be known had left her with a trauma. She had no choice but to undergo self-evaluations and treat the corresponding problems from time to time. The hermit Catlia had always been deeply knowledgeable about such matters. Apart from the information mentioned by the World Gehrman Sparrow, she also knew that the Mystery Prior and Savant pathways were neighboring pathways that could be interchanged at high sequences. It was likewise for the Arbiter and Lawyer pathways, the Prisoner and Criminal pathways, the Hunter and Assassin pathway, and the Planter and Apothecary pathway. As the other members of the Tarot Club dispersed their thoughts, Alger said to the World Gehrman Sparrow, "Thank you for your answer." He didn't say exactly what insights he had gleaned from the answer. In fact, for an instant, Alger wanted to leave the Church of the Lord of Storms and switch to another pathway. This was better than waiting for a very slim chance in the Church. However, he ultimately gave up on this idea. After all, his goal for a long time was to become a cardinal of the Church of the Lord of Storms. At present, he was beginning to yearn to be ranked first amongst the cardinal ranks, becoming an angel in charge of the mandated punishers or ascetics. As for the position of pontiff, Alger didn't yearn for it. This was because it was too close to the Lord of Storms, and he had many secrets he kept close to his chest. If he were to be chosen as pontiff, Alger suspected that he would be smote to ashes by a lightning storm that descended from the sky the moment he put on the papal tiara. Seeing that the exchange between the world and the hanged man had ended, Emlyn asked with curiosity, which pathway can the apothecary pathway be interchanged with? Being from the sanguine race made them have no thoughts of switching to other pathways, as it would often mean that they had lost their identify. Therefore, Emlyn wasn't too concerned about such matters. The planter pathway of the Church of Earth Mother, Catlia answered casually. The planter pathway. Possessed by the Church of Earth Mother. Emlyn frowned as he vaguely grasped something. At this moment, Zio also asked, which pathway neighbors the arbiter pathway? Lawyer, Catlia answered simply. Lawyer of the Black Emperor pathway. In other words, if I could become a Sequence 5, one would be able to switch to Sequence 4 of the Black Emperor pathway. And Furs had previously told me that Mr. Fool has the card of blasphemy. It contains all the secrets of the Black Emperor pathway. Zio suddenly realized that there was a glimmer of light for her future. It had to be known that the arbiter pathway was firmly controlled by the two royal families. Even the corresponding military only had the potion formula for the low and mid sequences. If they wanted to advance beyond Sequence 5, they had to receive a bestowment from the royal family. Just like how every general had to be conferred by the king or queen. Furthermore, what they obtained in the end was the concocted potion and the ritual. To Zio, this meant that it was almost impossible for her to get the Sequence 4 potion formula for the arbiter pathway. Of course, no matter how tightly guarded the potion formulas was, there were bound to be loopholes. The military's demigods knew of the ritual, and from time to time, they would cooperate with the royal family to hunt powerful supernatural beings. They could roughly narrow down the candidates for the main ingredient to a small area, but this also meant that they could only confirm the formula through repeated experiments. At the same time, the military demigods were also unable to grasp the supplementary ingredients. If they wanted to rely only on the main ingredients to advance, they needed to seek out the benediction of fate. And now, Zio had seen another possibility. At this moment, Audrey had already summarized the neighboring pathways that Mr. World and Ma'am Hermit had mentioned before, thoughtfully asking, among prisoner, criminal, hunter, assassin, savant, mystery prior, and monster, which ones are neighboring similar pathways? The World Gairman Sparrow glanced at the hermit and replied hoarsely, prisoner and criminal, hunter and assassin, and savant and mystery prior are similar pathways that can be interchanged at high sequences. This was knowledge that could be confirmed by Klein. Among them, the interchangeability between prisoner and criminal was something mentioned by the Red Angel evil spirit, to which Miss Sharon tacitly accepted. The interchangeability between savant and mystery prior had been personally demonstrated by Emperor Roselle. As for hunter and assassin, it was information that he had accumulated over time which could finally be confirmed. What about monster? There's only this one left. Furs, who was listening, couldn't help but ask. Seeing the world remain silent, Catlia thought for a moment before saying, it's difficult to be categorized as a neighbor of any other beyonder pathway. Just like fate, it can only objectively exist alone. I can be sure of that. I can only say that the most fundamental order in our world's supernatural powers might be chaos and disharmony. The reason why Catlia was certain that the monster pathway didn't have the means to be interchanged with other pathways was because her advancement ritual required her to analyze the snake of fate's blood. I see. Audrey was slightly uncomfortable with this disharmonious situation, but she quickly adjusted her state of mind. After the exchange was almost complete, all the members of the Tarot Club looked at the son Derek. The youth said without any hesitation, we've already set off. We're currently less than a day away from Afternoon Town. When we arrive, we'll be resting for another day or two before we begin exploring the Giant King's court. The son's words made Alger, Catlia, and company suddenly feel like myths were entering reality. Compared to places like the ruins of the battlefield of the gods, the giant king's court was a symbolic entity that appeared in various legends and in different secret documents. What secret was it hiding? What was buried in it? The answer was about to be revealed. Even though they had followed the world Gehrman Sparrow into the City of Miracles Liveseed, which was on par with the giant king's court, the Star Leonard and Justice Audrey were also secretly excited and looking forward to hearing more. After all, the city that the Dragon King had imagined into existence had lost too much in the process of being transferred to Grozel's travels. There were no traces of anything of value. Apart from the building itself, there was only the hall that expressed the extraordinariness of the ancient myths. Furthermore, what was even more important was that Derek had mentioned that the kings of angels had come to a secret plot in the giant king's court. As for the fool Klein, he was thinking of something else. Should I get little son to pray to the fool before the exploration? Then, I'll use the crimson star and the sea god scepter to extend my vision to a certain distance so that I can watch a live broadcast. Yes. In that case, if there are any accidents, I can still provide some help. The only problem is that this method of relying on the prayer points of light for observation cannot last too long. This has nothing to do with my own spirituality. It's just that this connection will fade away with time and last 45 minutes at most. Let little son pray every once in a while. That's under the premise that it doesn't affect his battle or attract the attention of the people around him. In that case, my spirituality can probably last for 2 hours. It's not on the same level as my sequence 5. Heh, it's also because of my recent rapid digestion of the potion. After pondering for a moment, Klein didn't speak. He controlled the world Gehrman Sparrow to hint to the sun, before exploring the giant king's court, you can pray to Mr. Fool and pray for good luck. In the process, you can also pray many times. Mr. World really is a nice guy. After Derek sincerely thanked him, he hurriedly turned his body towards the end of the long, model table. Then, he saw Mr. Fool, who was enveloped by the grayish-white fog, nod slightly. Chapter 1104 Contradiction/B The world above the gray fog had been restored to its state of silence, as though the gathering that had just ended was an illusion. Klein bent his finger and lightly knocked on the edge of the long, model table. He made the pages of the Roselle diary which Katlia had just given appear once again. Amidst an indescribable stillness, Klein cast his gaze towards the first paragraph of the first page with a solemn expression. September 27th. I saw Miss Ithaca once again. I had a nerve-wracking and thrilling but sufficiently wonderful experience with her. As expected, I prefer women of this age. I'm not just reminiscing about my youth, but rather that I haven't changed after so many years. I'm really dedicated. I read your diary with such seriousness, and you're giving me this? The corners of Klein's mouth twitched as he lampooned at the emperor who he had only seen a portrait of. He immediately gathered his thoughts and shifted his gaze. In a lounge at the basement of St. Samuel Cathedral. After Leonard Mitchell opened his eyes, he deliberated for a moment and said in a low voice, "Old man, the secret order's Zeradol seems to be in Backlund." In his mind, the slightly aged voice quickly sounded, "Indeed." Upon hearing this, Leonard immediately asked, "Old man, are you familiar with that Zeradol? Didn't you say that the Zoroast family and the Zeradol family are both important nobles of the Solomon Empire?" From his point of view, as ex-colleagues and former comrades in arms, how could old man not be familiar with Zeradol? Palaz Zoroast scoffed. "I'm familiar with the Zeradol who died in the War of the Four Emperors. The one alive whose now should be his descendant. I might or might not have seen him before." Sigh, the Zeradol back then had already obtained clues regarding the second sequence, one Beyonder characteristic from the true creator. He was waiting for the War of the Four Emperors to end before searching for it. If he succeeded, he would be considered a king of angels. Unfortunately, in the War of the Four Emperors, he directly encountered the existence from the Antigonus family who could be known as the Half-Fool, and Bethel Abraham was also involved. He could appear anywhere, anytime. If he hadn't been quickly banished and sealed by Evernight and Storm, I might not have survived to the end of the War of the Four Emperors either. The half-fool. Leonard's eyelids twitched when he heard this title as he thought of the entity above the grey fog for some baffling reason. He then forced himself to control himself and directed his thoughts to something else. Even from the description of a bystander, Mr. Dor was clearly one of the top existences among the kings of angels. It required two true deities to join forces to banish and seal him. There's a high chance that he was especially good at escaping, making it very difficult to kill. And back then, the battle situation was tense, so it was imperative to eliminate an enemy that posed a threat as soon as possible. Old man is reminiscing about the past, so he's feeling a little uneasy. He actually said so much in one breath. Amidst his thoughts, Leonard suddenly said, I was left in Backlund because they wished to use you to attract Amon here. The wistful feelings in Palaz Zorost's tone vanished as he clicked his tongue. Who made this guess? I don't think it's you. However, it's not bad that you know how to use your own resources to probe for the truth. This is something I've been very familiar with ever since I joined the Nighthawks. Leonard replied inwardly but didn't say a word. Palaz Zorost continued, I guessed that too. To be honest, your ex-colleague's relationship with Evernight really confuses me. If it wasn't for how familiar the concealment forces that appeared that day was, I wouldn't have dared to make such a guess. With Zeradol and I in Backlund, Amon will arrive soon too. It truly is a perfect triangle of balance. What do you mean? The concealment forces used to deal with Amon came from the Evernight domain, not Mr. Fool? Does this point that there is a certain level of cooperation between Mr. Fool and the goddess, or is it that the faith of those higher up in the church actually to Mr. Fool? Leonard suddenly felt a strong sense of confusion and puzzlement regarding his position in the grand scheme of things. Seeing that Palaz was also quite confused, he converged his thoughts and didn't ask any questions regarding this. He frowned and said, 2 sequence 1 angels and a king of angels. Will this bring about a devastating disaster to Backlund? He remembered that Amon was a terrifying existence that could kill countless people silently, and could even live happily as his victim. Using this as a reference, Zeradol, who was of a neighboring pathway, definitely possessed similarly terrifying powers. If he and Amon were to clash, half of Backlund or the entirety of Backlund could become the capital of death or the capital of bizarreness. Palaz Zorost laughed and said, balance also means that everyone will be very restrained. Besides, it's very likely that Amon won't let his true body enter Backlund. At most, he will send a large number of avatars over. After all, the impossibility of a divine descent by Evemite doesn't mean that Storm or Steam can't. What do you mean? Leonard acutely grasped the key point in Old Man's words. Palaz Zorost's tone suddenly became more relaxed. Regardless of whether it's because of the war or for other reasons, Evemite is likely unable to interfere with the matters on the ground at the moment. Otherwise, why would she need to lure Amon over to form a balance? She'd directly set up a trap, and who knows, she might be able to capture Zeradol or scare the cowardly seer away. Did something happen to the goddess? Leonard suddenly turned nervous. The slightly aged voice replied, it might not be a bad thing, and it might be a good thing. Without waiting for Leonard to ask further, Palaz Zorost sighed again. Amon was attracted to Backlund by me. What about Zeradol? What about me? I think Zeradol is also here because of you, and you're in Backlund because of me, Leonard pondered as he replied. Why do you think you're in Backlund? Palaz immediately scoffed. Leonard immediately replied, this is the arrangement of the church. It can't be the effect of the law of convergence of beyonder characteristics, right? That's not necessarily true. Palaz's tone turned a little stem. Most of the time, the law of beyonder characteristic convergence will not directly show in places where you can sense it. Most of the time, it will influence fate. Just like when you board a train, you'll suddenly feel that the scenery along the way is beautiful and will get off the train in advance, resulting in you entering the small city. This might be because there are beyonders or mystical items of neighboring pathways around you. In other words, there are other things in Backland that attracts you and Zeradal here, and through you, my fate is affected, causing me to be arranged by the church to stay in Backland most of the time? Leonard asked in enlightenment, hoping to gain confirmation. Palaz Zoroast slowly sighed and said, that possibility can't be ruled out. Above the gray fog, Klein soon flipped to a diary page of value. November 21st. As I had made too many preparations in the early stages, I obtained that chaotic and terrifying Grade 0 sealed artifact even faster than I imagined. And then, after a difficult battle, and with some help, I finally restored it to a pure Sequence 1 Beyonder characteristic. In a few more days, the ritual will be completed. I should be able to advance to Sequence 1 Knowledge Emperor of the Mystery Prior Pathway. November 26th. Sunny and breezy. The ritual was very successful. I digested it thoroughly, and my anchors were even more stable. There weren't many difficulties during the entire process. I'm already a Sequence 1 angel, a Knowledge Emperor. Bernadette no longer has to worry about the influence of the hidden sage. She can abide by the words, "Do as you wish, but do no harm," and continue on this path. At the same time, the level of an angel at Sequence 1 means that I can greatly resist the notice and corruption from the cosmos. I can head to the Crimson Moon and see what's happening there. Regardless of whether Mr. Dorr is lying or not, everything points to the fact that the Crimson Moon is the key to the problem. If I wish to become a true deity, I have to figure out the reason. I'll make preparations for another 3 more days before attempting to land on the moon. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Don't quote me on that. Upon seeing this, Klein recalled the hysterical diary page of Roselle. He began to suspect that it was written after the Emperor's landing on the moon. Putting down the remaining, unread diary pages, Klein began to use dream divination to recall the content he had read over the past year. He wanted to use the comparison to find clues to Roselle's abnormal mental state. Not long after, he saw a few lines of text in his dream. It was the last diary entry that was theoretically written by Roselle. I'm unable to give any actual suggestions because I myself can't see the true faces of the 7 deities or those evil gods. This might be partially related to the second blasphemy slate that the ancient organization hides. Unfortunately, one only have a rough idea of the hidden parts, and I'm unable to verify them. In this diary, the Emperor had even solemnly warned his friends to be careful of the moon. The dream suddenly shattered, and Klein snapped awake. There was an obvious look of fear in his eyes. He clearly remembered that, a long time ago, Roselle had confirmed that there was a hidden portion in the second blasphemy slate. July 19th. The night of the blood moon. Mr. Dorr's answer allowed me to confirm one thing. In that ancient secret organization, the second blasphemy slate I saw wasn't complete. This. The Emperor forgot? No, how could he have forgotten such an important matter? He only appeared a little extreme, and he didn't have much of a problem. Why did this happen? Klein couldn't help but mutter to himself silently, having an inexplicable and terrifying feeling. The last diary entry, or rather, the Emperor Roselle who wrote that sentence seemed to be another person. Chapter 1105. The key diary entry above the grayish-white that wasn't perturbed at all. Klein silently sat at the end of the long, model table, like a stone statue that had existed for hundreds of thousands of years. Regarding the discovery he had just now, he felt a deep sense of fear from the bottom of his heart. He felt a chill rush out from the back of his head, spreading across his entire body, bringing with it obvious yet real shudders. It was as if he had witnessed a familiar friend become a stranger in a very short span of time. His actions were abnormal, as though he had been replaced by someone else. Of course, there was a clearer and more direct analogy in this aspect. It would be Leonard Mitchell coming to visit and discuss the matter regarding Palaz Zoroast as a monocle is suddenly taken out and then put on. Could it be that the Emperor was unknowingly corrupted after his ascension to the Crimson Moon, and he didn't notice it at all? He usually didn't show any abnormalities. Only through reminiscing about his past through his diary entries, analyzing his inner voice, and talking to himself would certain premonitions surface in his mind? Or could it be that this was a form of hypnosis by Adam? But Roselle was at least a sequence one when that happened. Klein couldn't help but lower his head to inspect himself. He imagined how another version of himself existed in his body without realizing it. He wasn't sure if this entity could be called a human. This truly is an extreme sense of horror. Klein slowly took a deep breath and forced himself to focus his attention on the diary pages of Emperor Roselle. Soon, he discovered something worth reading. July 28. I attended that ancient secret organization's gathering once again. From the discussions among the members, I sensed a problem. Is it because I advanced too quickly that I'm relatively inexperienced? There are many things that I have never heard of before. Just like how they mentioned about the corruption from the cosmos and underground. This is the first time I know of their existence. I wonder how many of them are PS1 or X's. Apart from a minority of the members, most of them don't like others knowing their levels. While others are communicating with each other, I asked old Mr. Hermes with a whisper, hoping to understand more about the corruption that stems from the cosmos and underground. Hermes told me that this isn't something I can come into contact with at my current level. Just learning about it alone will cause me to be corrupted. It's actually that scary? What could it be? I'm even more intrigued. That old Mr. later told me that the corruption that originates from underground can be ignored because it will fade with time. A long time ago, in the era when the ancient gods were active, powerful creatures had attempted to resolve this problem completely. In the end, it made things worse and caused tremendous losses. Later, they gave up on the idea of directly exerting influence, and they switched focus to sealing and guarding it. From that day forth, although accidents happened occasionally, it was stable overall. Today, even if there are no seals or guards, as long as no one comes close and tries to go deeper, there won't be any incidents of corruption. What a surprising situation. It appears it doesn't require the protagonist of this era to resolve this problem. Old Mr. Hermes mentioned the cosmos again and said that the situation there is more complicated, interesting, and more dangerous than I imagined. He said that even a Sequence 2 angel doesn't have much knowledge of the cosmos. They only have a general understanding of it. They aren't aware that, apart from the dangers, there are too many other things. If it wasn't for the fact that he once knew an existence that was good at wandering the cosmos and learned plenty of matters from that person, he wouldn't be able to tell me all of that. I was very curious, but I didn't hold much hope when I asked about the existence who was adept at wandering the cosmos. Old Mr. Hermes didn't hide the truth. He said that it was Mr. Dorr, Bethel Abraham. Mr. Dorr. I pretended not to know anything and asked about that person's level in a very casual tone. Hermes didn't answer directly. He only said that in the fourth epoch, even angels and demigods would address him by his name in private. Those who could make everyone address them by their titles are in a small minority, of which Mr. Dorr was one of them, aside from Evernight, Storm, Earth, and the other deities. Is that so? Mr. Dorr's level really isn't low. The corruption that stems from underground will naturally fade with time. A Rhodes said that the gray fog gives it a feeling that resembles that of an object from underground. It hopes that I can explore the underground world after I return to my throne of divinity. As for Luca Brewster, he's certain that the higher the sequence, the greater the danger the underground world will bring. Klein tapped the edge of the long, mottled table with his fingers. He was increasingly puzzled about what was happening underground. Fortunately, Hermes's description, the state of the abandoned castle, and the attitude of the Evemite goddess seemed to indicate that the corruption that stems from underground would naturally dissipate. Leaving it alone was the best solution. Phew, then I shall temporarily put aside my worries regarding the underground world. Hermes's words and the bronze door deep in the City of Miracles corroborate with each other. The dragon of imagination Ankwelt had really tried to resolve the problem of the underground world, but ended up with fear and trauma. From the looks of it, the greatest possibility for the coming of the apocalypse is probably from the cosmos, and my current sequence doesn't qualify me to know of it. Amidst his thoughts, Klein sighed as he continued flipping through the diary pages in his hand. After reading a few pages, his eyes suddenly lit up and locked onto one of the pages. December 31st. The end of a year is the most suitable time to make a resolution and start a new story. I've already thought of where the 8 secret mausoleums should be built. I'm just clueless about the last one. This has to be more covert than the 8 previous ones, or else it will be meaningless. After a long thought, I thought of a place, the nameless island where Grimm was buried. Of course, the abyss is also an option. However, I can't find a living devil in the area that I can enter, so I can't force them to become my citizens and help me build a mausoleum. Ordinary humans can't survive there, and even powerful Beyonders will find it difficult to resist the corrosive properties of the abyss itself. Regardless, the environment on that nameless island seems like a pretty good choice. The princes of abolition in the 4th epoch's understanding of citizens is too limited. The rule of an emperor is not only limited to humans and humanoid creatures, all living things should be my subjects. And there are many extraordinary creatures on that nameless island with no intelligence. They have long worshipped and followed me. I can totally drive them into building a secret mausoleum. When I wrote this, I suddenly recalled that experience. Because I dreamed of Grimm, I brought Edwards, Benjamin, and the others back to this nameless island and discovered that those extraordinary creatures lived together in harmony. They were gathered together and holding a ritual, and amongst them was the deceased Grimm. I was indeed shocked back then. I felt a fear that I hadn't felt in a long time, and everything appeared extremely bizarre. That time, William and Polly died. Only Edwards and Benjamin survived. If I hadn't already become powerful and controlled a Grade 0 sealed artifact, everyone would have perished along with them. The power of those Beyonder creatures that affected that nameless island actually came from the cosmos, and those who were corrupted would return to the source after dying. Thankfully, the power from the cosmos could only project a small portion of it into the real world. I finally solved the problem and made that nameless island my secret base. Now, it's time to use it. After reading the diary, Klein didn't feel exhilarated that he had correctly guessed where Emperor Rosel's final mausoleum was. Instead, he frowned slightly. This was, on the one hand, because the corruption caused by the cosmos had truly appeared in front of him. On the other hand, the nameless island wasn't that secretive. Other than the Emperor, there were also the 2 survivors, Edwards and Benjamin. It didn't meet Rosel's requirements of complete secrecy. Before this, did Edwards and Benjamin pass away normally, resulting in them being unable to divulge any secrets, or was it that, after Rosel successfully built the mausoleum, he made these 2 subordinates stay on the island forever, resolving the problem of spirit channeling? Of course, if Rosel had the corresponding sealed artifacts or Beyonder powers, he could also make them completely lose the corresponding memories. After a moment of silence, Klein flipped through the diary pages again in search of the coordinates to the nameless island. However, he didn't see the corresponding content when he reached the last page. Instead, there was a diary entry that vaguely revealed some of Rosel's thoughts in his later years. December 27th. I've been feeling uneasy recently because I have no confidence in what will happen next. I no longer yearn for help. I'm very satisfied if they can remain neutral. I have put myself in the most dangerous situation. This is an act of me taking initiative, but it is also a choice due to a lack of options. Sometimes, I'm very confused. How did I end up like this? Was I too extreme, or was this the only thing I could do? No, at this point in time, I can't be confused anymore. Apart from affecting my mindset and making the already slim chances even slimmer, it's meaningless. Now that I've reached this point, I can only continue on. If I succeed, it will naturally be sunshine and rainbows. All my hopes are placed on one sentence: life is possible by being in death's embrace. From the looks of it, the Emperor really chose the method of making use of one's revival after death to escape the madness and corruption. This is simply crazy. It's like he's playing a game of Russian roulette with all 6 chambers filled, hoping that one of the rounds misfire. People who don't like going to the extremes, or those who are good at coming up with all kinds of strange ideas, wouldn't consider the viability of this method. Perhaps it's because the enemy can't guess it that this might give the emperor a sliver of a chance of living. Klein leaned back into his chair as he silently sat in the ancient palace for a while. After he slowly recovered his scattered thoughts, he considered how to find the nameless island. I remember that the person who visited the nameless island, Benjamin, seems to be from the Abraham family. This be asked via Miss Magician. Yes, I'll be meeting her soon. There's no need to specially get the fool to pass the message. I'll get Queen Mystic to ask the descendants of Edwards, William, and Polly. That will be more suitable. With this in mind, he surveyed the area and sighed before disappearing above the gray fog. Chapter 1106 Making Contact. Returning to the real world, Klein immediately took out a pen and paper and wrote a short letter. Investigate the nameless island which led to the deaths of Grimm, William, and Polly. This can be done through the descendants of Edwards, Benjamin Abraham, and the descendants of the 3 deceased. This was a letter to Queen Mystic Bernadette, so Klein didn't write the reason. He believed that she would understand what this meant. After folding the letter, Klein casually found a candle and began the summoning ritual. After completing the setup, he placed the letter on the altar, took 2 steps back, and recited in ancient Hermes, I summon in my name, an invisible creature that roams the upper realms, a strange spiritual body that is friendly to humans, a messenger that belongs solely to Bernadette Gustave. The moment he said that, Klein's spiritual perception was triggered. He instinctively activated his spirit vision with a mere thought. However, he didn't see anything. Then, he discovered that the letter placed on the altar had disappeared. Queen Mystic's messenger is very special. Next time, I'll switch to using my spirit body thread's vision. Klein was stunned for a second before he sighed inwardly. In the evening, under the illumination of the street lamps that lit up one after another, a carriage drove to the intersection of the Backland Bridge area and East Borough and stopped by the side of the streets. Wearing a long dress and a dark cloak, Furs paid the fare of 3 soldi before alighting from the rental carriage. She walked slowly along the shadows of the street, preparing to make a large detour to escape from her imaginary stalker. At the end of the previous tarot gathering, she had swiftly overcome her laziness, packed up, and went out to visit her former teachers, classmates, and colleagues. As for the reason, there was no need for a special reason. It was very normal to care about friends and acquaintances after an air raid. And the reason why it wasn't last week was because, in the eyes of the ordinary citizens, the situation in Backland was especially tense. There could be a new round of attacks at any moment, so everyone naturally tried their best not to leave the house. During the visit, Furs had originally planned on diverting the topic onto the strange tales at the hospital, but to her surprise, there was no need for her to do so at all. Her former teachers, classmates, and colleagues would usually chat about such matters on their own accord after some idle chatter, making one convinced that such illusions happened at every hospital. No, Furs knew that it wasn't an illusion, so she inexplicably felt horrified, suspecting that she would have nightmares at night. I don't have to make any major changes at all. As long as the patient's miraculous recoveries are changed to them having their physical wounds healed, only to have them go bonkers, it would make for an excellent horror story. Furthermore, it happens in a city that everyone is familiar with and also in the hospital that people often come into contact with in the city but exudes a terrifying atmosphere. It will result in perfect immersion. I can almost foresee another best-selling novel about to be Biyao. I just don't know if I can write this genre well. The only problem is that this story will lack sufficient emotion. A female patient passionately kissing a face that's covered in mushrooms and weeds? Isn't that way too outlandish? Furs walked as she thought, entering a creative state of mind. At this moment, her vision blurred. She saw a figure walk out from the shadows in front of her where the gas lamps couldn't illuminate. The figure wore a black trench coat and a half-top hat. He had a deep-set face with cold facial features. Apart from his gold-rimmed glasses, he looked identical to the crazy adventurer of the 5 Seas, Gehrman Sparrow. Although Furs knew that Mr. World wouldn't hunt her and was here to fulfill the contract, she couldn't help but tense up. It was as though she had met her strictest teacher from back in her school days. Good evening. Her footsteps slowed down, but she still continued moving forward and greeted him. Klein nodded without a word. He turned around and walked into a secluded alley to the side. The gas lamps inside were already damaged, so it was dark. Despite the dark environment, Furs similarly didn't say a word. She lowered her head slightly and followed behind Gehrman Sparrow at an adequate pace. When they reached the depths of the alley, Klein looked around and said in a deep voice, "Help me ask your teacher if he knows of this person, Benjamin Abraham. If he knows him, I want all his information and all the text and pictures he left behind." Okay. Furs was nervously waiting for Mr. World to teleport her somewhere else, but she never expected him to mention something else for no reason. She nearly failed to react. She didn't ask why and quickly nodded in agreement, as though she couldn't wait to do it. Then, she took a deep breath and continued waiting for Gehrman Sparrow to approach her. He grabbed her shoulder and began teleporting. But after a few seconds, nothing happened. Furs looked up in shock, only to see Mr. World still standing in front of her, looking at her. She then heard him say in a deep voice, "Write it now. Write it now." Furs didn't ask why as she subconsciously said, "I didn't bring any paper, a pen, envelope, or stamp with me." Before she could finish her sentence, the 4 items were thrown at her. Furs caught the items and took a few steps out. Using the gas lamps at the end of the alley which opened up to the roads and the hard wall, she quickly wrote the letter to her teacher, Dorian Gray Abraham. With both hands in his pockets, Klein waited patiently without any signs of impatience. In fact, he had long been lurking around Miss Magician without showing himself. According to the address Furs provided, he had been secretly monitoring her from the moment she left home in the afternoon. His monitoring was done by getting his marionettes to pray to see God Calvetua from time to time while his actual body stayed above the gray fog, using the prayer light dots to observe the situation around the magician. With the help of his true vision, Klein was currently certain that Zeradal hadn't targeted Miss Magician, thus, it was safe to make contact with her. After knowing that Miss Magician had met Zeradal's marionette, how could he be at ease and be daring enough to meet her and take her traveling? Now, he was certain that Zeradal had been attracted by the Abraham family's sealed artifact or Saint of Secrets bodies. As for a mere sequence 6 like the magician, she wasn't worthy of notice. Hence, she wasn't exposed. A few minutes later, Furs finished writing. She used a sticky herbal powder she carried with her to seal the envelope and pasted the stamp. "Do I throw it into the mailbox now?" Furs glanced at the cover of the letter with her teacher's address and real name and asked hesitantly. She felt that she had to do it herself. She couldn't hand it over to the world, or it might bring danger to her teacher. Of course, if Gehrman Sparrow insisted, Furs felt that there was nothing she could do. Even if she tore the letter apart, there was still a possibility of her being hypnotized or having her spirit channeled. Klein nodded indiscernibly. "Return after you're finished posting it." Phew. Furs let out a long sigh of relief. Turning around, she ran towards the street and found the mailbox. After finishing all of this, she returned to the dark alley. Without waiting for Gehrman Sparrow to speak, she handed over the fountain pen and the remaining 2 stamps. She very quickly said, "1 was enough." Klein gave Miss Magician a look before he took the stamp and pen and calmly said, "This means that your teacher's residence is less than 100 kilometers from Backlund." Furz's expression froze. "What's the big deal?" "I also know that your teacher lives in Pritz Harbor, and there's a high chance that he hasn't moved away yet. As for why I gave you 3 stamp tickets, of course it was intentional." Klein muttered to himself before taking a few steps forward to stand in front of Miss Magician. He then reached out his left hand that was wearing a transparent glove and grabbed the lady's shoulder. Furs subconsciously lowered her head again. The surrounding colors immediately became saturated and layered while countless, indescribable figures flashed. When the things and colors she saw returned to normal, Furs instinctively raised her head to thank him. However, Gehrman's sparrow had already disappeared. Furs sized up her surroundings in a daze and realized that she was standing in an empty corner. In front of her was a door, and a din and the smell of alcohol were emitted from beyond the door. Furs pulled at her cloak and walked out the door with a hint of fear, only to see many men dressed as pirates. They had scimitars and guns, either hanging or lodged by their waist. While drinking hard liquor, they discussed the strengths of the fleets of Faysac and Lone in high spirits. Quite a number of beautifully dressed women were amongst them, like dancing butterflies. She was wearing a long, dark-colored cloak in a Backlund style. Her brown hair was long and slightly curled. She had a rather mature temperament, but her expression of fear made it seem like Furs was a lamb that had barged into a wolf pack. It was so disharmonious and eye-catching, and it quickly attracted the attention of many. She felt a little familiar with what those people had said to her. It was as if they were part of a language branch she had learned, but she couldn't understand them immediately. Where am I? What am I doing? Who are they? As Furs was at a loss, a plump man squeezed over and said in broken Loanese, "10 soli, 1 night." Furs had been involved in many of the Beyonder circles over the years. Although she didn't know where she was, she knew very well what kind of situation she was in. The light in her eyes flickered strangely before they converged into one point. An indescribable aura emanated from her body, making the people around her subconsciously avoid her gaze. This was the authority of a judge, a qualitative change in the ability of an arbiter. Berserk Sea, Theros Island. Danitz hid in the shadows, watching the intelligence peddler, Bartz, in a serious manner. Chapter 1107. Relax. As a hunter who had shadow cloak, Danitz's hiding and monitoring abilities were always pretty good. Back then, he had even helped Gehrman's sparrow lay an ambush for Steel Mavedi. At this moment, he didn't show any traces of himself, but he felt a little bored. He was eager for Anderson to switch with him as soon as possible. When will such a life end? Vice Admiral Ailment, hurry up and appear. No, not now. It's better to wait until Anderson arrives. Danitz did some introspection and rationally ended his prayer. He was worried that a pirate admiral at Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy would discover that he was hiding in the dark, and he lacked the courage and confidence to deal with her. Of course, if he wore the boxing glove, everything wouldn't be a problem. As long as he made the decision fast enough, fear and apprehension wouldn't be able to catch up to him. You seem very troubled. Suddenly, a voice rang beside Danitz's ear. Danitz jumped out of the shadows in shock as an orange flame quickly formed in his hand. At the same time, he cast his gaze to the source of the voice. He saw Anderson hiding in the woods. There were green vines stuck to his head that seemed to meld him with the environment. Dogs hit. It was unknown if Danitz was cursing Anderson or himself. After venting his anger, he asked, "When did you come?" 2 minutes ago, Anderson replied with a smile. You hid well. I didn't manage to find you immediately, so I followed your hiding habits and casually asked you a question. Danitz was momentarily unsure if he should be proud or angry. He asked with mixed feelings, if I had remained calm just now, would you have failed to discover me? In theory, Anderson said with a smile, completely unfazed. But as an experienced hunter, there can't be only one way. Just as Danitz was about to ask what other solutions there were, he suddenly saw Bartz extinguish the candle and prepare to sleep. Minutes later, the figure of intelligence peddler, Bartz, appeared by the window in the darkness. With a nimble leap, he landed into the shadows outside the house. That was where Danitz had been hiding. Having re-entered the shadows, he was almost stepped on by his target. Bartz walked towards the sea under the cover of the shadows. Dogs hit. Only then did Danitz appear, giving Bartz the middle finger. Anderson also left the woods. As he pulled out the branches from his head, he smiled at Danitz. I think we'll hit the jackpot tonight. Danitz glanced at the strongest hunter in the fog sea and nodded vigorously. I hope it's Vice Admiral Ailment. He used the shadows that were everywhere at night and immediately took the lead in following the intelligence peddler, along with Anderson. They maintained a perfectly adequate distance. Not too stupid, Anderson observed for a moment before chuckling. Danitz scoffed inwardly but didn't respond. He knew very well that this wasn't an occasion where they could afford to mock and provoke each other. 15 minutes later, Bartz arrived at the beach and stood there, staring at the dark blue sea under the crimson moonlight. He didn't wait too long. In the darkness of the sea, a huge outline appeared, gradually forming a black ship with a white flag fluttering in the air. On the flag, 2 ghostly blue flames burned within a pitch-black skull. The Black Death. Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy's flagship, Black Death. Danitz instantly became excited. If not for his shadow form, his pupils definitely would have dilated in a bid to draw in more light to see every detail of the ship. He subconsciously moved a distance forward, hoping to confirm if Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy was on the ship. As the gigantic sailboat approached, the 2 people in the shadows could see sailors busy on the deck. Is there a dock for docking here? Or will they just give Bartz a dinghy and get him to row himself over? Just as these thoughts flashed through Danitz's mind, he heard Anderson say with a suppressed voice, "Leave." Danitz's greatest strength was that he was good at following the instructions of an authoritative figure. Be it in front of Edwina Edwards or Gehrman Sparrow, he would follow the instructions to a T, apart from grumbling at most. At that moment, although his face was filled with puzzlement, with the intention to retort and persist in his own plans, he still used the shadows to silently leave the beach. When they could no longer see the Black Death and could only hear the vague crashing of the waves, did Danitz leave the shadows and appear in the forest. He hurriedly asked, "Aren't we going to confirm if Vice Admiral Ailment is aboard?" Anderson sized up Danitz and chuckled. Never underestimate a beyonder who's very famous at sea but has lived to this day. Every pirate admiral is a target you must be careful against. You must never be careless. Danitz subconsciously replied, "Admiral of Blood Senor, Admiral Hell Ludwell." They were all pirates who were easily killed by a particular crazy adventurer. Anderson was momentarily at a loss for words to rebut Danitz with. After a few seconds, he said, "So, isn't Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy worth paying more attention to considering how she survived Gehrman Sparrow's attack?" Happy face after careful thought, Danitz inexplicably felt that Anderson's words made sense. Just as he was about to speak, his throat suddenly felt itchy as he coughed. After coughing a few times, his throat began to swell in pain, and he could taste metal. "Look, I told you to be careful." Anderson clenched his fists and held them to his mouth. He coughed lightly, but it wasn't as serious as Danitz. Tracy must have spread all kinds of ailments around the ship. Once anyone approaches it, they'll quickly be infected with it and be exposed. With this wide of a range, it means that she has completely digested the Sequence 5 potion and has a chance of advancing to Sequence 4. Why couldn't it be that she has already advanced to Sequence 4? As he was far from the source of the infection, Danitz quickly recovered and instinctively retorted. "If that were the case, you are either on the Black Death, or you have a victim of the Black Death disease and are on your deathbed." Anderson half-turned his body and cast his gaze towards the obstructed beach. Tracy must have used some sort of trick. It's unlikely for her to only be able to maintain the target area of the ailments to be at the front and not the other 3 directions. Instead, she used the wind to spread the ailments to affect the people on the shore. With that said, Anderson clapped his hands and smiled again. "Isn't our encounter proof that Vice Admiral Ailment is on the ship? You can inform Gehrman Sparrow." Danitz didn't hesitate any further. He immediately set up a ritual and summoned the messenger. Using the excuse of guarding the area to prevent any accidents, Anderson walked out of the forest. It was 3 in the morning in Backlund's East Borough. Apart from the moonlight and starlight, it was pitch black. Wearing cotton pajamas and a sleeping cap with a protective hairnet, Klein sat on the bed and received the letter from Rionette Tynker without asking anything. Opening the letter, he calmly got out of bed, took out a pen from his pocket, and wrote on the back of the letter, "Return to the port city and await further instructions." After watching Miss Messenger leave, he calmly changed into his shirt, put on his vest, tied his bow tie, and put on his black trench coat. Then, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the gray fog. Using the topaz spirit pendulum to divine the danger level of this operation, he received almost no revelations. Without any hesitation, he returned to the real world and stood in front of the mirror. He picked up his half-top hat and wore it above his head. On the bunk bed in the room outside, Konas and Inuni opened their eyes. In an empty room on the Black Death, a figure quickly outlined itself. He had black hair and brown eyes with cold and hard facial features. He was none other than Gehrman Sparrow. Under the dim crimson moonlight, Klein swept his gaze and casually found a chair to sit down as he admired the sea vista outside. In the captain's cabin 1 level away, Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy, who was dressed in a white blouse and beige pants, watched Bartz leave the room in disgust. She pulled at her collar out of reflex, and her expression turned livid. She had just learned that Blazing Danitz and the strongest hunter Anderson had been staying in Theros Island recently with unknown motives. They're all related to Gehrman Sparrow. Is that fellow looking for me? Tracy narrowed her eyes as she walked towards the window without any hesitation. She was prepared to instruct the sailors on the deck to steer the ship away from these waters. At this moment, her thoughts suddenly turned sluggish. It was as if she had sunken into a state where she knew she was in a dream but was unable to extricate from it no matter how hard she struggled. Not good. Black flames abruptly emerged from the surface of Tracy's body, attempting to burn away any external influences. However, while the flames were initially able to flow smoothly, they later began to turn intermittent as they kept falling to the ground like withered petals. A strong sense of despair surged within Tracy as her thoughts turned increasingly slower. Desperate, she quickly condensed a layer of crystalline ice around her body, retracting the invisible threads towards her and wrapped herself in layers. At that moment, the door to the captain's cabin creaked open. Wearing a silk top hat and black trench coat, Gehrman Sparrow walked in. Then, he politely closed the door. With a light cracking sound, the entire captain's cabin instantly became extremely quiet. The sound of crashing waves was no longer present, as though they had been separated from the real world. As for the invisible spider webs that entangled Tracy, they seemed to misunderstand the order that was given as they tightly bound Vice Admiral Ailment up, preventing her from moving or using her beyond her powers. Distortion. As her thoughts returned to normal, her brain no longer felt frozen. What do you want to do? She couldn't hide her fear as she watched Gehrman Sparrow slowly approach. What she couldn't understand was why the other party would give up on the attempt to make a marionette even though she had clearly lost her ability to resist. The reason why Klein did so was because he was worried that Vice Admiral Ailment and the Demoness of White were related by blood. This way, Tracy's death would cause the demigod who was good at hexes to sense something and take measures ahead of time. Tap. 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 Klein stopped in front of the Demoness. Chapter 1108 Messed Up Family. Gehrman Sparrow's silence made Tracy's heart sink, as though she had fallen into an ice cavern. When he saw despair surface on Vice Admiral Ailment's face, Klein took out a piece of paper from his pocket. With a flick of his wrist, he made it fly forward like a poker card. With a whoosh, the slip of paper cut through a tiny portion of the invisible spider webs like a piece of metal. It tore open the translucent ice crystal and lacerated Tracy's left arm, causing blood to splatter. The surface of the paper was quickly dyed with a bright red tinge before it boomeranged back from the trapped Demoness into Klein's palm. Tracy originally imagined that the piece of paper would come at her throat, but she never expected it to only target her arm. She was momentarily stunned. Only when Gehrman Sparrow folded the piece of paper and placed it into an iron cigar case did she suddenly realize something. She asked, "Your true target is Katerina?" Klein placed the iron cigar case back into his pocket without answering her. He calmly asked, "You are her descendant?" Upon hearing this, Tracy, who was still trapped by the ice crystal and spider silk, suddenly let out a low laugh. "I'm not just a descendant. I'm her child." Daughter, as Klein rejoiced over his caution in not recklessly killing her, causing Demoness of White Katerina to sense something. He subconsciously analyzed whether Katerina was the mother or father of the ailment maiden. If Katerina was also formerly a male, it's possible that she's Tracy's father, but the problem is that she was already a Sequence 4 demigod during the Pale Disaster that was at the end of the 4th epoch. And for the assassin pathway, a man will change into a woman at Sequence 7 Witch. In other words, if Katerina is Tracy's father, Tracy needs to be at least 300 years old. However, it's impossible for a Sequence 5 Beyonder to live for so long. Even most Sequence 4 and Sequence 3 saints aren't capable of that. There's only one answer, and that is that Tracy was born by Katerina. Also, it happened in the past few decades. An advanced maternal age of more than 1,000 years. Klein nodded slightly and confirmed without any change in expression. She's your mom? Tracy's expression suddenly turned odd. No, my mother. Just as he was about to ask what was the difference between that and mother, since it was essentially a more formal and eloquent manner of speech. Tracy sneered and said, my mom is another person. She used to be my father. You demonesses have messed up families. But that isn't the reason why you spread catastrophes to the world. Klein used his clown powers to control his facial muscles as he continued looking at Ailment Maiden, his face impassive. Tracy, who was already in a dire situation, was now beginning to abandon herself to despair. Without waiting for Gehrman Sparrow's response, she sighed and gave a self-deprecating laugh. Maybe it was all a mistake since I was born. Abnormal parents, abnormal family relationship, abnormal sect members. They sculpted me and harmed me. At the age of 8, one found out that my father, who I had always admired as a role model, had suddenly become a woman. He was becoming like a dainty flower by the day, becoming more and more adept at using his charms. Later on, he even found a male friend and gave birth to my younger brother. Can you imagine that kind of feeling? After I ran away from home and came to the sea, I finally found a normal sense of self-recognition and a social identity after many years of hard work. I finally understood what I really wanted. Then, a potion bottle turned me into a woman. Heh, a woman, after listening quietly, Klein said without changing his tone, your instigation skills are pretty good. Tracy turned agape, but in the end, she only sighed and smiled with a complicated expression. I admit that I was trying to win your sympathy. Everyone wants to live. Isn't that right? However, I didn't lie. That was my life experience. She stopped exaggerating her pain and sadness and paused. Before you kill me, I would like to ask you a question. It's a question that won't put you in a difficult spot. What is it? Klein looked at the demoness and asked. Tracy hesitated for a moment before finally asking, before you came to assassinate me the previous time, did Helene know about this? Klein was silent for a moment before he said, she didn't know what would happen. Tracy's face suddenly glowed. Really? Before Gehrman Sparrow could respond, she revealed an extremely complicated expression. Before I die, can I ask you for another favor? If you can see her again, tell her that I feel very guilty about what happened in the past, but I don't regret it. At this point, Tracy tried to shake her head, but failed thanks to the restriction provided by the crystalline ice and invisible spider webs. She could only laugh at herself. Forget it, there's no need to tell her. Let's leave it at that. You can do what you were here for. With that, Tracy closed her eyes. After a few seconds, she didn't feel the pain she expected. Instead, she heard Gehrman Sparrow say in a deep voice, say this, no one is to disturb me. Tracy was surprised as she felt perplexed, and it showed on her face. However, since she was already facing death, such a small matter wasn't worth nitpicking about. She opened her mouth and said, no one is to disturb me. As soon as she said the statement, the same voice echoed on the Black Death, greatly amplified. The pirates didn't have any doubts about this. It was as if they were following a specific pattern. They instinctively avoided the captain's cabin and continued their work. Since the captain said not to disturb her, they naturally wouldn't seek her out. At the same time, Tracy saw Gehrman Sparrow take off his top hat and press it to his chest. He bowed slightly at her, as though he was bidding her farewell. Then, she felt as though she was isolated from the entire world. There was silence. Even the crazy adventure was gone. She had obtained the environment of not being disturbed just as she wanted. The magnify and distortion powers of the lawyer pathway. The layer of ice on Tracy's body began to melt, but the invisible spider webs continued to bind her firmly, preventing her from doing anything. She couldn't even change her center of gravity. Hence, she could only stand there like a lifelike wax statue. He didn't kill me. Tracy looked ahead blankly, momentarily in disbelief. She didn't believe that Gehrman Sparrow hadn't taken action because he pitied her. This crazy adventurer had killed many pirates, and there had never been a situation where he showed mercy. As for Tracy, although she believed that she wasn't the typical demoness and didn't live up to her status as a demoness, how could she not have done anything bad as a pirate? She was experienced in both the slave trade and in plundering ships. Similarly, Tracy didn't believe that Gehrman Sparrow was moved by her beauty and her experiences, and had ended up coveting her, because his cold gaze was like he was looking at a dead person. There must be other factors. A thought flashed through her mind as she made connections with matters she might be involved in. She quickly came to a conclusion. It's likely because of my blood relationship with Mother. As for demonesses, they're all good at hexes. Once I die, Mother will immediately notice it. When she discovers that there's a problem here, she will make preparations ahead of time, preventing Gehrman Sparrow from finding his target during his subsequent actions. That's why he allowed me to live but made it impossible for me to contact anyone else. From the looks of it, regardless of the outcome of his operation targeted at Mother, he will return to kill me. And if I want to continue living, I have to succeed in saving myself before that happens. In Tracy's heart, she didn't have much of a relationship with her mother, Katerina. This demoness of unaging had lived for a long time, and most of the time, she had maintained her youthful state of mind by dating young men. She was passionate about the occasional children that she had whenever she found it novel to have one. At other times, she was mostly indifferent. However, as she grew older, Katerina's evaluation of Tracy was that she resembled her past self more and more. Hence, she was doted on her and provided more help. However, Tracy didn't want such attention. It only served to make her lose her original gender, putting her into a painful situation that she couldn't shake off. Phew. Although I hate her and blame her, I still unknowingly rely on her, hoping that she can respect my opinion more. I hope that she can escape Gehrman Sparrow's pursuit. Tracy once again began to struggle in an attempt to escape her bound state. On the one hand, she was trying to save herself. On the other hand, she wanted to inform her mother to be careful of Gehrman Sparrow as soon as possible. Of course, Tracy found it questionable that Gehrman Sparrow, who had likely advanced to Sequence 4 recently, would be able to harm her mother. She was, after all, someone who had survived since the 4th epoch, and was a demoness with the title of unaging. However, she didn't only pin this belief on hope alone. This was because Gehrman Sparrow had helpers, such as the Death Consul who even her mother feared. Plop. Tracy finally collapsed on the ground and tried to roll towards the desk. But no matter how hard she tried, she was unable to roll her body. The person she was fighting against was none other than herself, she who had been distorted and magnified. Above the gray fog, Klein had already taken his seat in the high-back chair of the fool. He placed the paper stained with Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy's blood on the surface of the long, model table. Following that, he conjured a pen and paper and wrote a divination statement, Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy's mother, Katerina's current location. Putting down the pen, he held the 2 pieces of paper and leaned back into his chair. He closed his eyes and repeated the words he had written. After repeating it 7 times, he entered a dream. He saw a tall and towering Gothic bell tower appear in the gray world. Around the bell tower, the white-robed Katerina stood in the shadows of a few houses. She observed the surroundings with a heavy expression, as though she was searching for something. As for the crimson moon hanging high in the sky, its position was identical to what he had seen before entering the grey fog. This meant that Demoness of White Katerina was still in Backlund. She was in Westborough, in search of a particular target. Chapter 1109 Patience Font Big Middle Small Previous Index Next add bookmarks. After ending the divination and returning to the real world, Klein walked to the room outside the rental flat. There, he pondered for nearly a minute while looking at the crimson moon in the night sky. Perhaps there's still another chance for digesting the potion, he muttered silently as he ultimately rummaged for something. He took the 2 marionettes and disappeared into the shadows. In Backlund, he no longer dared to use Flaming Jump, afraid that it might catch Zeradol's notice. After all, it was impossible for him to always have an opportunity to ignite Will Septon's paper crane to protect himself. This was a sign of disrespect towards the Snake of Fate, and it was easy for Dr. Aaron's family to be targeted if he kept visiting them. In the blink of an eye, Klein appeared at the back of the tall, Gothic-styled bell tower in his dream. He hid in the shadows, one formed by the Bell of Order, a symbol of Backlund. Immediately following that, he and his 2 marionettes split apart, each occupying different hidden spots. After doing all of this, Klein quickly turned a rat into a marionette, allowing it to run to the edge of the range of his control. It opened its mouth and softly chanted an honorific name, the great god of war, the symbol of iron and blood, the ruler of chaos and strife. Demoness of White Katerina is in this area. Since Klein was fulfilling his agreement with the Red Angel evil spirit, he also hoped that this high-level creature would step into a trap that might possibly be for him. At the same time, he had some doubts about Sauron Einhorn Medici's true intentions. He had no intention of urgently getting help from the Church of Evernight or Queen Mystic. He planned on watching from the sidelines to confirm the situation, lest he implicated others into springing a trap. Just as the prayer ended, the grey rat suddenly twitched and fell quietly beside the rubbish bin. It had already lost its life and was no longer Klein's marionette. This was a way to prevent himself from being marked by the Red Angel evil spirit. As for him, after giving up on that rat marionette, he immediately left the area where the Bell of Order was located with Konas and Anuni. He also made the winner pray to see God Calvetua a few kilometers away. After the prayer, the 2 of them continued to retreat, widening their distance. Then, Klein hid in a storage room in a particular house, took 4 steps counterclockwise, and went above the grey fog to sit at the position of the Fool. He then beckoned for the sea god scepter. With the help of the prayer light of the winner, he expanded his scope and observed the target area. At the same time, with his other hand, he held the piece of paper that was stained with Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy's blood. With a medium like this, and a general scope, it didn't take long under his true vision before he found the hidden Demoness of White Katerina. The black-haired, blue-eyed woman was dressed in a pure white robe. She looked like a weightless feather, and she was gently drifting across the streets and alleys. Even if the patrolling policemen looked in the right direction, they were unable to detect her presence. If it wasn't for the grey fog's help, Klein could only use spirit body threads to see through the invisibility to a certain extent. Taking a deep breath, he patiently waited for the Red Angel evil spirit to appear. He also observed Katerina, wanting to know what she was looking for. He suspected that the Demoness of White was targeting Trissy Cheek. Seconds changed to minutes as the crimson moon gradually tilted to the side. Having wandered around the Bell of Order for a while without finding anything, Katerina revealed a slightly frustrated and disappointed expression. She looked as though she was about to leave that area at any time. And the Red Angel evil spirit never appeared. This Sauron Einhorn Medici was just lying to me. He really didn't have the Demoness of White as his goal. No, that's not necessarily the case. If that happened, then his condition would be meaningless. The Red Angel evil spirit has actually arrived at the scene, but has chosen not to immediately take action like me. He is waiting for the battle between Katerina and me and my companions to reach its most intense state before suddenly appearing to reap the greatest benefits. Klein's thoughts wandered as he came up with a guess. He suspected that the Red Angel evil spirit was as cautious, careful, and staid as he was. He hoped to be the fisherman pulling in the net and not that net. This is really troublesome. Next, it will depend on who's more patient. Klein muttered silently as he continued to observe the situation around the bell of order through the prayer light. Tick. 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 The second hand was beating at the same pace in the quiet night. Demoness of White Katerina's expression turned increasingly gloomy. Suddenly, she cast her gaze on the glass window of a building. The dim night was like a mirror reflecting the things in front of them. Katerina's beautiful blue eyes sparkled slightly as the surface of the mirror instantly turned dark, as though there were countless objects and layers of space hidden within. The glass window seemed to have become a passageway to an alternate world. With a thought, together with the various beyonder powers that Demoness Trissy had showcased, he suspected that Katerina was about to use the mirror world to leave this place and end her hunt tonight. How can the Red Angel evil spirit still endure this? Klein tensed up as he instinctively wanted to put down the sea god's scepter and return to the real world. He wanted to act against the Demoness of White and prevent her from leaving. As this thought flashed through his mind, he ultimately didn't move. He felt that he could still wait a little longer because even if Katerina left the surrounding area of the Bell of Order, he could still locate her again as long as she didn't discover that something had happened to her daughter. When the time came, he could first summon a Rhodes to ask about the target's actual abilities and items. Then, he could either seek the help of Queen Mystic Bernadette or the Church of Evernight to borrow a Grade 1 sealed artifact. He could then make the scales of victory tip towards him before taking action. I deliberately didn't hide my operation this time. If I were to borrow a sealed artifact and the Archbishop assents to it, that means that the goddess's true attitude towards George III is, she doesn't like the king becoming the Black Emperor, but she can only accept it silently. If someone is willing to disrupt the ritual, she is willing to provide some help. Klein calmed his slightly anxious feelings, allowing his observation to become more relaxed. At that moment, Demoness of White Katerina's expression returned to normal. She floated to the glass window and entered without any corporeal form. The layers of illusory worlds within the mirror converged as though they were constantly moving away. At this moment, using his true vision to observe the area underneath, Klein seemed to hear a shrill female scream. This cry seemed to come from another world. It contained extreme fear and disbelief. None of the residents in the surrounding area were jolted awake. No one heard anything. That was Katerina's scream? What exactly happened to her? Klein's gaze froze as he thought of something. The Red Angel evil spirit is also an evil spirit, and it's also capable of using mirror blink, thus, using this medium. In other words, he is no stranger to the mirror world. Could it be that Sauron Einhorn Medici had been hiding in the mirror all this time, waiting for the Demoness of White to throw herself into a trap? As his pupils dilated, the darkness and gloominess in the glass window disappeared. The mirror had lost its unique characteristics and returned to its original state. A few seconds later, the bottom of the glass window slowly bled, forming a liquid that slid down. In the areas that the liquid passed, the surrounding grayish-white tint spread, covering its original pale yellow color. It was like a newly embedded stone. Drip. 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 The drops of liquid landed on the ground, dyeing it bright red like blood, beautiful like flowers. Upon seeing this scene, the muscles on Klein's face twitched slightly before he forced himself to use his clown powers to control his expression. This ending was really unexpected. A powerful and senior Sequence 3 saint, one who had lived for more than 1,000 years, was unable to put up any resistance in front of the Red Angel evil spirit's trap. There was only silence left. As for Klein himself, even if he counted the 2 marionettes and the sealed artifacts he possessed, he was still a little weaker when compared to Katerina's strength. He needed to make up for this gap through prior preparations. This also meant that, if he were to face the Red Angel evil spirit, he would probably not end up any better. He would similarly be powerless and puny, slowly sinking in the torrent that followed. Is this what a former king of angels is? Even though his strength has yet to recover to its peak state, it still leaves one in such despair. Seeing the blood seeping out from the glass window gradually lessen, he took a deep breath and returned to the real world. Following that, he and Winner and Nuni exchanged positions as he teleported to the glass window. When Bizarro sorcerers switched positions, they could only choose two, swapping their bodies or bodies and external objects. However, it was impossible to be too precise at his current level, so Klein wasn't able to leave behind whatever he wanted. He could only choose to leave everything or not leave anything behind. Enuni, who wore Gehrman Sparrow's appearance, said to the glass window in a deep voice the moment he materialized in front of it, "I have already fulfilled my promise." A figure suddenly appeared on the glass window. He was wearing a long black robe with red stripes. He casually wore a hood, revealing a soft outline. His skin was brown, and he had a pale face. He was the gatekeeper who had been possessed by Sauron Einhorn Medici. "Well done," the young man walked down from the window and said with a smile. Upon hearing this, Klein took out something from his pocket. The corners of his mouth curled up as he happily replied, "You did well too." As he spoke, he blew at the monocle in his hand and wore it on his left eye. Sauron Einhorn Medici's smile froze. Chapter 11:10 Spirit Channeling. For a moment, the cold night became abnormally scorching hot, as though invisible lava was surging within it. However, everything quickly returned to normal. The Red Angel evil spirit sized up Klein and smiled as if nothing had happened. "I'll say it again. You have talent in being a provoker. Back when Zeradol digested the Bizarro sorcerer potion, even he didn't dare to pretend to be a mon in front of me." There wasn't a hint of anger in his tone. He didn't mention why Zeradol didn't dare to do so, but with his gaze sweeping across Klein, it was as if he had fallen deep inside a glacier, his body freezing in the process. This was how his actual body felt. Even though he was separated by a marionette, the back of his neck and back still had goosebumps. Without needing Sauron Einhorn Medici to say anything else, Klein understood the hidden meaning behind his words. Anyone who dared to use such a method to scare him would suffer the punishment of steel and blood on the spot. Looking at the Red Angel evil spirit in front of him, who had a converged aura but was giving off a feeling of an extremely high level of superiority, Klein couldn't help but inwardly mutter, "If it wasn't for the fact that the Bizarro sorcerer potion had been digested to a certain extent, I would have thought that your willpower was as strong as steel and that your strength has returned to the level of at least a sequence 1. And now, I can basically confirm that, under your calm demeanor, you're hiding a strong fear towards Amon. This also means that your current level is at most at sequence 2. Besides, I was already mentally prepared to lose a marionette. In order to quickly digest the potion, I had to take the risk. If Danitz was here and he was given the opportunity to shout out, 'Coward,' twice, he could probably quickly digest the provoker potion even if he had drunk 4 or 5 bottles. Without further agitating the Red Angel evil spirit, Klein smiled and took off the monocle. Back in the Solomon Empire, Zeradol should already be an angel. How would he still need to digest the Bizarro sorcerer potion? "I'm talking about the young Zeradol," Sauron Einhorn Medici said casually. "This is consistent with the description from the grandpa in Leonard's body." Klein nodded indiscernibly and focused on the main topic at hand. "You've already finished off the Demoness of White? What do you think?" The Red Angel evil spirit laughed and said, "Also, one must be polite. Since Katerina calls herself the Saintess of White, then you shouldn't call her a Demoness anymore." Polite. A hunter emphasizing manners with me. At that instant, the corners of Klein's mouth twitched, expressing the ludicrousness of the matter, but he ultimately held back. From the looks of it, provoking isn't limited to ridiculing and cursing others. Danitz, who only knows how to curse using one word, is a disgrace to hunters. As he thought, Klein said, "I've already fulfilled my promise. I think you don't mind giving me a small reward." "Reward?" the Red Angel evil spirit scoffed and asked. Klein ignored his attitude and continued, "I wish to communicate with the Demoness of White. I want to ask her something." "Just this request?" the Red Angel evil spirit asked in amusement. Klein nodded. "That's right. No problem. Sauron Einhorn Medici raised his right hand and grabbed at his glabella. From there, a blurry figure was pulled out. It was none other than Saintess of White Katarina, whose facial expression was filled with horror. "Can we have a private conversation?" Seeing this, Klein looked around. The Red Angel evil spirit immediately laughed and said, "Do you need a room where the two of you can be together? Think about it with that brain of yours. Even if you want to hide the questions you would like to raise from me, I can still find out through Katarina's spirit. That is, of course, unless you don't plan on returning her to me? Or are you a little boy who needs things to follow a ritual?" Klein made the marionette reply with a deadpan expression, "I have a way to make her forget my questions." This was both the truth and a lie. The truth was that he could use Vin Rambise's manipulator's Beyonder characteristic to complete the job. However, it was relatively difficult, and the chance of failure was very high. Furthermore, the negative effects weren't minor. The reason why he lied was because he had no intention of doing so. This would expose many important matters. He only had one purpose in saying this: to make the Red Angel evil spirit suspect that the answers obtained weren't the truth and that there were key hidden parts beneath the surface. From that, he would ignore the value of the answers obtained on the surface. This worked wonders on people who were highly suspicious. Of course, there was no hope of success. After all, the entity opposite him was the Red Angel who was master of conspiracies. Not bad. After Sauron Einhorn Medici heard Klein's reply, his body suddenly vanished, projecting itself onto the glass window. Klein glanced at the blood that had already coagulated on the gray stones, feeling somewhat wistful as he brought the somewhat muddle-headed demoness of White Katarina far away from the glass and into a dark alley. He then took out candles, essential oils, and herbal powders. He set up an altar and prayed to the Evernight goddess, hoping that he could use ritualistic magic to complete the mediumship. This was a skill he had mastered when he was still a Nighthawk. As the ritual was completed, an immense and terrifying power descended from an indescribable height, causing the surroundings to become unusually quiet. Klein's eyes instantly darkened, as it was like the dark night was compressed. He then saw more things around Katarina's spirit, flickering light and blurry mind storms. He easily passed through those obstacles and faced the demoness of White's body of heart and mind. Has the cooperation between the demoness sect and George III come to an end? Without being careless, Klein began from a less sensitive question to observe Katarina's condition. The dazed and confused look on Katarina's face faded a little as she nodded with a pure smile. "Yes." "Then why are you still in Backlund?" Klein asked further. Katarina replied solemnly, "I'm in pursuit of Trissy. She took an important sealed artifact from us." "What's the sealed artifact?" Klein suddenly recalled the sapphire ring that Demoness Trissy had once worn on her hand. It was intricately made. Demoness of White Katarina said with a pious expression, "It has something to do with the awakening of Primordial. Apart from its high level at grade 0, it doesn't have any special abilities. Indeed, it has to do with the Primordial Demoness. You people even changed Trissy's name to Trissy Cheek." Klein didn't reveal that he knew the true name of the Primordial Demoness. Instead, he asked, "Do you know where the other 8 mausoleums of George III are?" Katarina frowned slightly and answered in a manner meant to garner sympathy, "They're separately located in the southwest suburbs of Backlund, Alwa County, Eastchester County." This Demoness of White first gave a simple account of the locations of the 8 mausoleums before introducing their specific locations and situations in detail. The 8 mausoleums have already been repaired. They temporarily deactivated the teleportation tunnel. Even if they have the corresponding charms, there's no way to open them again. It's almost impossible to find them directly from the outside world. Other than Prince Grove, Duchess Georgina, the 2 angels of the royal family, and George III, no one else can enter. Well, some of those places were places where Conas Kilgore often went hunting, so it matches my guess. This means that the Demoness of White isn't lying. I'll make a confirmation above the grey fog later. If this is really the case, it would be quite troublesome. With the current situation, be it Prince Grove or Duchess Georgina, they would definitely be in the sights of the angels. The biggest hurdle is entering the ruins. Once entry is gained, what follows won't be that dangerous. War has already broken out, and there's a need to fight against the Phasacians. Demigods are a limited resource, so there's no way George III can have every ruin be guarded by a saint, with the option of an angel to provide reinforcements. As Klein's thoughts raced, he first posed a question: the royal family has 2 angels? In fact, that's not the case. It's very likely that George III is also one, Katerina replied honestly. One of those 2 angels is the founder of the Lone Kingdom, Protector William I, who has survived since the 4th epoch. He is a sequence one-hand of Order of the Arbiter pathway, while the other is the former Duke of Southville, Blink Augustus. He is a sequence 2 balancer. As for how many grade 0 sealed artifacts the royal family has, I'm not sure. The founder on the 10-pound note is still alive? I have the feeling that history has seeped into reality again. After some thought, he nodded and asked, "Why are you working with George III? For a conqueror beyond our characteristic. It's already in our hands." Katerina's expression became a little excited. Conqueror was the name of the Red Priest Pathway Sequence 1 potion. Then, will it belong to the primordial Demonis, or belong to the upper echelons of your sect? Klein asked thoughtfully. Who are the higher-ups of your sect? It will be sacrificed to primordial. However, we have to find the sealed artifact that Trissy took away first. Currently, it has been kept by the Saintess of Black. All the higher-ups of our sect have colors as their code names, Katerina answered truthfully. After understanding more details, Klein terminated the spirit channeling, cleaned up the altar, and allowed the Demoness of White Spirit to return to the glass window from before. As for himself, his body suddenly turned transparent. With the help of teleportation, he disappeared from this region, rendezvousing with his actual body in his other marionette. After watching Gehrman Sparrow leave, the gloominess and confusion on Katerina's face suddenly vanished as her expression became extremely astute. She then entered the glass window, which had turned dark again. A few seconds later, Saron Einhorn Medici and Demoness of White Katerina walked out of the mirror together. The latter's figure was clear and filled with flesh. She showed no signs of death. Are you saying that he was asking about the other 8 secret mausoleums of George III? The power of the spirit channeling came from Evernight? The Red Angel Evil Spirit stroked his chin and turned to ask Katerina. The Demoness of White nodded slightly and said, "That's right." Heh. The Red Angel Evil Spirit immediately laughed. So he doesn't want George III to become the Black Emperor. Katerina's eyes darted around as she revealed a smile. But it's impossible to succeed. No matter how fast he advances or how much help he receives, there's no way he can resist the combined forces of the royal family, the military, and that organization. No, if it's just the Augustus family, with his level and strength, he won't be able to do anything, unless Evernight personally descends. Having said that, this Demoness of White asked in a seemingly casual manner, "I'm very puzzled. Why didn't you kill me directly after grasping the absolute advantage over me?" The Red Angel Evil Spirit glanced at her as the corners of his mouth slowly curled up. "Do you think you have the right to be my true target?" You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.